Hello guys, welcome to Super Harry. Today we have an incredible story for you. What if hospital wing scan after troll attack revealed 56 tracking charms and 12 marriage contracts placed by Dumbledore? If you enjoy the video, please like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Chapter 1, The Scan. The troll smelled like old boots left to rot in a flooded basement, and Harry Potter decided that was somehow the worst part of the whole experience. Not the 15-foot wall of grey muscle that had nearly crushed Hermione Granger into the bathroom tiles. Not the low, wet sound it made when Ron's Wingardium Leviosa sent its own club into the top of its skull. Not even the way it had dropped, the full shuddering weight of it hitting the floor hard enough to crack stone, close enough to Harry that he'd felt the air move against his face. No. It was the smell that stayed with him as Professors McGonagall, Quirrell, and Snape came bursting through the bathroom door, robes flying, wands already drawn and pointed at a troll that was very thoroughly unconscious. McGonagall looked at the troll. Then at Harry and Ron, both breathing hard, wands still raised. Then at Hermione, who was pressed against the wall beneath the sinks with her robes askew and what appeared to be troll mucus in her hair. "Explain," McGonagall said. One word. The temperature in the room dropped. Ron opened his mouth. Closed it. Tried again. We were looking for Hermione," he managed. "She didn't know about the troll. We came to warn her. She'd been in the bathroom since this afternoon," Harry added quietly. He was watching Snape, who was watching him with an expression that wasn't quite what Harry had expected, not triumph, not irritation, but something more carefully neutral, like a man doing math in his head. "We found her. Then the troll found us." McGonagall turned to Hermione, who had pushed herself off the wall and was attempting to straighten her robes with shaking hands. "Is this true, Miss Granger?" Harry thought Hermione would agree. It was the sensible answer, the easy one, the one that got all three of them out of this bathroom without losing points or worse. But Hermione Granger had a relationship with the truth that made easy answers physically difficult for her, and she said, "I went looking for the troll myself. I thought I could, I read about them in Fantastic Beasts and I thought," she stopped. Swallowed. "I was being stupid." McGonagall blinked. It was the closest thing to surprise Harry had seen on her face since the sorting. 5 points from Gryffindor, she said finally, for Miss Granger's serious lack of judgment. She paused. And 5 points each to Mr. Potter and Mr. Weasley for sheer nerve. Another pause, shorter. "Do not tell anyone I said that." Quirrell was visibly trembling, though whether from the troll or from general Quirrellness, Harry couldn't tell. Snape said nothing. He was still looking at Harry, and Harry had the uncomfortable feeling of being read, not in the casual way teachers sometimes looked at students, but the way you look at a map you think might be wrong. Then Pomfrey arrived, and everything changed. She came through the door like a weather system, medical bag already open, conjuring a stretcher before she'd fully assessed the room. She went to Hermione first, a quick, practiced scan with her wand, moving in a smooth arc from head to toe, and Harry watched the tip of the wand glow a steady pale green. "Minor bruising, some shock," Pomfrey said briskly. "Nothing that won't sort in an hour. You'll come to the hospital wing regardless." She turned to Ron. Another scan. The wand glowed the same quiet green. "You as well, Mr. Weasley, purely as protocol." Her eyes moved to Harry. "And you, Mr. Potter." Harry stepped forward without argument. He was used to this by now, or used enough to it. Pomfrey ran scans on any student involved in something that could charitably be described as an incident, and being chased by a fully grown mountain troll definitely qualified. He stood still, watching the wand begin its arc. The tip glowed green. Then it glowed yellow. Then it glowed a color Harry had no name for, something between gold and white and the particular light you sometimes saw at the edge of a fire just before it went out, and Pomfrey's wand hand stopped moving. She stood very still for a moment. The wand tip was blazing. Not dangerously, not explosively, but in the sustained, building way of something that had found a great deal more to illuminate than it had been expecting. Harry counted the seconds without meaning to. 1, 2, 5, 8. The light from the wand tip was casting shadows now, actual shadows, thrown long and sharp against the bathroom tiles. Madame Pomfrey? McGonagall's voice was careful. One moment. Pomfrey's tone had gone somewhere very precise and very quiet. She completed the arc of the scan with the same smooth motion, not rushing, the wand trailing that impossible light all the way to its end. Then she lowered her hand and looked at Harry for a long moment with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Madame Pomfrey, in Harry's limited experience, had two expressions, efficient briskness and maternal sternness, sometimes overlapping. The thing on her face right now was neither. It was the expression of someone who had just read a document they weren't supposed to have access to and found something in it that they desperately wished they hadn't. "Mr. Potter," she said, "I need you to come with me to the hospital wing right now, please." "Is he hurt?" McGonagall asked sharply. "That is what I intend to find out." Pomfrey picked up her bag. "Come along, all three of you. Professor McGonagall, I would ask that you accompany us as well." McGonagall's eyes narrowed. "Poppy, as a courtesy," Pomfrey said, and her voice had something in it that closed the subject, "I would ask that you accompany us." Snape and Quirrell were not invited. Harry noticed that, and noticed Snape noticing it too, and noticed Snape file the fact away behind his eyes with that same careful mathematical expression. The walk to the hospital wing was quiet in the way that walks become quiet when one person in the group knows something that no one else does and is choosing every word with the precision of someone diffusing something. Pomfrey walked quickly. Hermione kept stealing glances at Harry. Ron looked like he wanted to ask what was happening but had picked up enough atmospheric pressure to stay silent. Harry walked and thought about the light from the wand tip and the expression on Pomfrey's face and filed both away in the part of him that had spent 11 years on Privet Drive learning to notice things that adults didn't think children noticed. The hospital wing at night smelled of potions and clean linen and the particular cold of high stone walls. Pomfrey got them all into beds with efficient speed, pressed blood-replenishing potion on Hermione for the shock and a calming draught on Ron, who insisted he didn't need it and then drank it in one go anyway. McGonagall stood by the door with her arms folded and her eyes tracking Pomfrey's movements with the fixed attention of a woman who had known Poppy Pomfrey for 30 years and recognized that something was genuinely wrong. Harry sat on his bed and waited. Pomfrey drew the curtain around his bed. Then she went to her office, and Harry heard the sounds of her going through her filing system, not the small drawers near the front but the larger cabinet further in, the one with the diagnostic enhancement tools that she brought out for deeper scans, the kind she used when a student came in with something that the standard wand scan flagged for follow-up. She came back with a broad flat instrument that looked something like a compass crossed with a metronome, silver-cased and etched with fine lines Harry didn't recognize. She set it on the bedside table and tapped it with her wand, and the silver needle at its center began to rotate slowly. "I'm going to do a deeper diagnostic scan, Mr. Potter," she said. She wasn't looking at him while she said it, she was calibrating the instrument with small precise taps. "It's routine after an incident like this. It won't hurt." "All right," Harry said. "The standard scan I performed in the bathroom detected something that requires clarification." She was still calibrating. The needle rotated, steadied. "When I perform this scan, it will create a visual record that I can document. I want you to understand that everything it shows will be documented fully and accurately. Do you understand?" Harry looked at her. "Are you telling me something before you tell me something?" Pomfrey stopped calibrating. She looked at him with that expression again, the one he didn't have a name for, and something moved across her face that might have been the precise moment a person decides to stop being carefully professional and simply be honest. "Yes," she said. "I am." "Then tell me what the first scan showed." She was quiet for a long moment. The needle rotated. Outside the curtain, Harry could hear McGonagall shift her weight. The first scan showed a significant number of external magical constructs attached to your person, Pomfrey said. Charms, Mr. Potter, not injury. The wand glowed as it did because there were a great deal of them, and they are, she chose her words with care, not insignificant in their complexity. Harry was quiet. The needle rotated. How many? He asked. That is what the deeper scan will tell us. May I proceed? Harry nodded. The diagnostic instrument was not like a wand scan. It didn't sweep, it settled. Pomfrey positioned it over Harry's head and it began to emanate a low, clear tone, almost musical, and the silver needle became a compass again and swung in small arcs that grew gradually larger. Harry watched the ceiling and felt nothing, no sensation at all, and that was almost more unsettling because whatever was being counted was clearly there and clearly attached to him and he couldn't feel any of it. The silver case began to display numbers. The needle was ticking now, short sharp increments, like a clock being wound by something that had found a great deal of spring to compress. Pomfrey watched it. Harry watched her face. She stopped breathing somewhere around the 50s. The needle settled. The tone faded. The silver case displayed its final count with the flat impersonal certainty of an instrument that had no understanding of what the numbers meant and therefore no reason to soften them. 56, tracking constructs, external, non-consensual, layered. Pomfrey set the instrument down on the table with the careful steadiness of a person making sure their hands don't shake. Then she reached into her kit and produced a second instrument, smaller, circular, brass rather than silver, and tapped it twice. She held it over Harry's sternum and waited. The brass circle turned dark. Then it displayed a second number. 12, binding contracts, pre-verbal, magically sealed, third-party authorized. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Harry looked at the numbers for a long time. 56 tracking charms. 12 marriage contracts. Pre-verbal meant before he could speak. Third-party authorized meant someone else had signed for him. He was 11 years old. He had no memory of his parents beyond a flash of green light that wasn't really a memory at all, more of an imprint, and he had spent 11 years in a cupboard under a staircase and later in a slightly larger cupboard they called a bedroom, and in all that time he had never been able to feel, not once, not even distantly, the 56 separate enchantments that had apparently been tracking his every movement since before he could walk. McGonagall, Harry said. A pause. Then, from outside the curtain, yes, Mr. Potter. Could you come in here, please? The curtain moved. McGonagall stepped through and looked at Pomfrey, and then at the two instruments on the bedside table, and then at the numbers they were displaying, and her face went through something rapid and controlled and finally landed on the particular stillness of a woman who needs a moment she is not going to take because there are more important things happening. Those numbers are accurate? She asked Pomfrey. The diagnostic instruments are calibrated to ministry standards and were last certified in September, Pomfrey said. They are accurate. McGonagall looked at the numbers again. 56. 12. Do we know the origin? That requires a third scan. One I would like to perform now, with your witnessed authority, if you're willing. McGonagall didn't hesitate. Perform the scan. Pomfrey reached into the cabinet a third time and came out with something Harry had not seen before, a long crystal rod, clear as glass, with a faceted tip that caught the light and threw it apart into its component colors. She tapped it against her palm, and it began to glow with a pale blue light, and she moved it in a slow, broad circle over Harry's entire body from head to foot, and the crystal clouded as it moved, catching impressions of the charms layered on him the way a piece of paper catches the impression of what was written on the sheet above it. When she finished, the crystal was dark. She placed it against the brass circle and murmured something, and the brass circle illuminated from within, and the impressions the crystal had gathered resolved, not into pictures, but into signatures. Magical signatures. Each charm had been cast by someone, and every piece of magic left a signature the way every fire leaves its own particular smell of smoke, and these, all 56 tracking charms. All 12 marriage contracts. They carried the same signature. Harry looked at it for a long time. He didn't know the signature yet, not by name, but Madame Pomfrey did, and McGonagall did, and both women were doing the thing people do when the worst possible answer turns out to be the correct one, that particular stillness, that very careful not looking at each other. "Tell me," Harry said. McGonagall said, "Poppy." "Don't," Harry said, and something in his voice stopped McGonagall in exactly the same way it sometimes stopped Aunt Petunia mid-sentence, not by being loud or aggressive, but by being absolutely certain. "Don't tell her to soften it. I need to know who this signature belongs to." Another silence. Pomfrey looked at Harry, and then at McGonagall, and then she picked up a quill from her bedside tray and she wrote a name on a piece of parchment and she held it out to Harry. He took it. He read it. He read it again. He set the parchment on the bed beside him and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then he looked at his hands, small hands, still slightly grubby from the encounter with the troll, the left one slightly scraped from the edge of a sink, and he thought about all the things that suddenly made a different kind of sense. The Dursleys, who had been told he was dangerous and must not make friends, must not seem special, must not do anything that drew attention. The years of teachers who noticed something and then abruptly didn't notice anymore. The letter, his letter, that had come and kept coming despite every attempt to stop it, because it had always known where he was. Because there had always been 56 different ways of knowing where he was. He thought about a man with half-moon spectacles and a long silver beard who had taken him to Diagon Alley and bought him an ice cream and smiled with great warmth and said, "I don't suppose you remember me, Harry." "I'm going to need," Harry said, very calmly, "to understand the legal situation." McGonagall and Pomfrey looked at each other. "The legal situation," Harry continued, still calmly, "regarding what it means for someone to place tracking charms on a minor without their guardian's knowledge or consent. And the legal situation regarding magically binding marriage contracts placed on a preverbal child. Because I don't know much about wizarding law yet." He sat up straight on the bed. "But I'm fairly sure that both of those things are illegal." Hermione's voice came from behind the curtain, quiet and slightly hoarse from shock. "They are." Harry looked at the curtain. "You were listening?" "I was awake," Hermione said, which was not precisely the same thing. A pause. "In Hogwarts, a history there's a section on, Hermione." Ron's voice, also from behind the curtain. "Maybe not right this second." "No," Harry said. "Actually, yes. Right this second, please." The curtain shifted, and Hermione Granger, still in her school robes with her hair in magnificent disarray, appeared at the gap with the expression of someone who had been performing the significant effort of not inserting herself into a situation and was deeply relieved to be invited in. She stepped through, took one look at the numbers on the diagnostic instruments, and her expression moved from relieved to incandescent. 56, she said. And 12 binding contracts. She turned to Pomfrey. "When you say preverbal, do you mean, before the age of 2, Pomfrey said. And the magical authority used to authorize the contracts, the third-party authority, would need to be either a blood guardian or a legally designated, magical custodian, Pomfrey said. Yes. Hermione looked at Harry. Who is Harry's magical custodian? His parents are dead. The Dursleys are muggles. They can't hold magical custodianship. The silence had a very specific quality to it. Oh, Hermione said. Said Harry. So when it says third-party authorized, that means, the same person who placed the tracking charms, Harry said. Presumably. Since they share a signature. Hermione sat down on the edge of Harry's bed as though her knees had made a unilateral decision. Her eyes were doing the thing they did when she was processing information at a speed that outpaced her ability to maintain a composed expression. But that means he had legal, he was your magical custodian and he used that position to, she stopped. Started again. That's not legal gray area, Harry. That's several distinct violations of the Custodial Magic Misuse Act of 1947. It's also a violation of the Betrothal Magic Regulations Act. Contracts placed without the knowledge of both subject families and without age of consent provisions are voidable by law and potentially criminally fraudulent if there was financial. She stopped again. Was there financial exchange? Pomfrey looked at the brass circle. The brass circle told them only that the contracts were sealed, it didn't tell them what they'd been sealed with. That would require a contract examination, she said. Which would need to be performed by a qualified legal examiner. There's one in Hogsmeade, McGonagall said, and then seemed surprised that she'd said it, and then seemed to decide that she'd said it because it was true and true things were relevant. She straightened. Gringotts also has a contract examination service. Potter, you have a Gringotts vault. Opened when I was born, Harry said. By my parents. Or, he stopped. Or by whoever was designated my magical custodian. Another waited silence. I want to see the vault records, Harry said. I want to see every transaction made on my vault since my parents died. He was still calm. Not the stunned calm of shock, but something more settled, the calm of someone who has been given, for the first time in his life, a clear and factual explanation for why his life had felt, since its very beginning, like something happening to him rather than something he was living. I want to see who opened the contracts, what was received in exchange, and I want to understand exactly what standing I have to challenge them. McGonagall was quiet for a long moment. The hospital wing's night sounds drifted around them, the distant pop of a settling fireplace, the soft movement of wind against high windows. She was looking at Harry with an expression that was layered in a way that took some reading. There was the professional wariness of a deputy headmistress considering an unprecedented situation, and underneath that there was something older and more genuine, something that looked like it might be anger, and underneath that something that looked like it might be grief. Mr. Potter, she said carefully. I need you to understand that what we have discovered tonight is significant. That it will need to be handled through proper channels, with appropriate, I understand that, Harry said. I'm not planning to walk into the headmaster's office and throw these instruments at him. McGonagall blinked. I'm 11, Harry continued. Not stupid. He looked at her steadily. But I am going to need help from adults who are not him. And I'm going to need to move quickly, before he realizes the scan happened and works out what we know. He picked up the parchment with the name on it and looked at it again, then folded it precisely and held it out to Pomfrey. Can this be the start of an official record? Dated and witnessed tonight? Pomfrey took it. Yes. Can the instrument readings be preserved? The crystal rod retains impressions for 30 days when properly sealed. The brass circle's reading can be transferred to parchment and notarized. Pomfrey was already moving, pulling her professional self around her like armor, because this was something she could do, procedure, documentation, the careful building of an irrefutable record. I can have everything sealed, witnessed, and copied to a third-party record within the hour. Copy it to Gringotts as well, Harry said. They accept record deposits from non-adults for vault-related matters, don't they? Hermione made a small, involuntary sound. Then she said, You've read about Gringotts? I've read everything I could find since September, Harry said. I didn't know what I was looking for. But I've been looking for something. The room was quiet. McGonagall sat down in the chair by Harry's bed, sat down deliberately, with the air of someone making a decision about something larger than seating, and folded her hands in her lap. All right, she said. Tell me what you need. It was, Harry thought, the single best sentence any adult had ever said to him. First, he said, I need you to tell me what you know about the tracking charms. Not what the scan told us, what you know. From before tonight. He watched her face. Because you didn't look surprised when Pomfrey showed us the results. You looked like you recognized something you'd been trying not to think about for a long time. McGonagall's hands tightened on each other. She said nothing for a moment that stretched considerably. Harry, Pomfrey said, very gently. You should know that Professor McGonagall spent the day before you were left at the Dursleys' house watching it. In her animagus form. She expressed concerns about the placement to the headmaster. Harry looked at McGonagall. What kind of concerns? The kind, McGonagall said, and her voice had gone somewhere very flat and very careful, that were dismissed. The silence that followed was different from the previous ones. It had a texture to it. He dismissed your concerns, Harry said, and then you spent 10 years being his deputy and, he stopped. Not accusingly, he genuinely wanted to understand the mechanics of it. How does that work? How does a person like you accept that? McGonagall looked at him for a long time. Very badly, she said finally. In hindsight. Something shifted in Harry's chest. Not forgiveness exactly, he wasn't sure what there was to forgive yet, and he wasn't sure forgiveness was relevant. More like, a calibration. An understanding of where the lines were and who was on which side of them. Right, he said. Can I trust you? I'd like to earn that, McGonagall said. Rather than have you take it on faith. Harry considered that for a moment. Then he nodded once. Fair, he said. Then here's what I need tonight, from both of you. The records preserved and sealed. A copy to Gringotts. And access to the library in the morning, not the restricted section, just the law section, which I know is in the main stacks near the back of the fourth shelf. He paused. And I need you both to not tell him. Tonight. Not yet. Pomfrey and McGonagall exchanged a glance. He'll notice the scan was performed, McGonagall said. Yes. But he won't know what it found unless someone tells him. And by the time he asks, I want to already know what I'm dealing with. Harry looked at the folded parchment in Pomfrey's hand. He has 56 ways of knowing where I am. I need to use that. I need him to think everything is normal while it isn't. Hermione, who had been sitting very still on the corner of Harry's bed, said quietly, That's very clever. It's basic, Harry said. It's what you do when you're smaller than someone. You don't let them see you getting bigger. He paused. I've been practicing that for 11 years. Ron's voice came from behind the curtain. It was quieter than usual, without its normal cheerful bluster. Harry. Are you all right? Harry thought about the question. Not the surface version, are you hurt, is anything broken, but the actual version, the one that was in Ron's voice right now. Not really, he said honestly. But I'm going to be. That's different. He heard Ron absorb that from behind the curtain. A long pause. Then, okay. And then, did you want me in there or should I, come in? Ron came in, and he was pale under his freckles in the way he got pale when something stopped being an adventure and started being real, and he looked at the numbers on the instruments with an expression that was struggling between fury and helplessness. He sat on the floor by the bed because there wasn't a chair, and that was somehow the most Ron thing Harry had ever seen, just sat down on the floor, crossed his legs, and looked at Harry as if to say I'm staying here, what do we do? Harry looked at the three of them, Hermione on the corner of his bed, Ron on the floor, McGonagall in the chair, and felt something he didn't quite have a word for. Not comfort. Not safety. Something more provisional and more real than either, the sense of being chosen, not by circumstance or prophecy or a signature on a contract, but by people who had seen something and decided to stay. Tomorrow morning, he said, we start. He reached out and turned the light off on the diagnostic instruments. The numbers disappeared. But Pomfrey had already written them down. In the morning, they would still be true. Outside the high windows of the hospital wing, Halloween had tipped quietly over into November, and somewhere in the castle, sleeping behind a silver and gold office door, a very old man with half-moon spectacles would wake in a few hours and feel, perhaps, a distant tremor in one of his many instruments, something shifting, something moving, and he would not immediately understand what it meant. By the time he did, Harry Potter would already be 3 steps ahead. Pomfrey sealed the crystal rod with a tap of her wand and wrapped it in preservation cloth and put it in the locked cabinet behind her desk. McGonagall signed the witness documentation with her full name and pressed her wand tip to the seal. The parchment glowed once, briefly, and the record became official. Hermione watched the glow fade and said, very quietly, to no one in particular, who signs a marriage contract for a baby. Nobody answered, because there wasn't an answer that helped. But Harry, lying in the narrow hospital bed with the curtain drawn and Ron asleep on the cot Pomfrey had conjured next to him, stared at the ceiling for a long time and thought about that question from a different angle. Not who signs a marriage contract for a baby, but rather, what does it mean that 12 different families received those contracts and didn't come forward? 12 families. Some of them would be Death Eaters or former Death Eaters, certainly, people to whom the name Potter was a commodity rather than a person. But 12. There were only so many families with enough standing to be approached for this kind of arrangement. 12 meant at least some of them were families that Harry might know. Families that were considered respectable. Families whose children he might be sitting next to in class right now. He thought about that for a while. Then he thought about something else, the way McGonagall had said very badly, in hindsight, and the exact weight of those 3 words. The years they contained. The choices made and unmade inside them. He thought about trust, and how it was built, and what it cost, and what happened when the person who was supposed to be most trustworthy turned out to have 56 separate ways of making sure you never got far enough away to figure that out. He thought about his parents. James and Lily Potter, who had died fighting Voldemort and whose deaths had apparently left their son in the custody, magical custody, binding legal custody, of the man who smiled at him across the Great Hall every morning and ate his porridge and told the students that the third-floor corridor was forbidden. He thought about the vault at Gringotts and what the records might show. He thought about Sirius Black, who was supposed to be his godfather and was in Azkaban for betraying his parents, except that now Harry was revising every piece of information he'd ever received and asking himself the same question about each one: who told me this, and why? Sleep didn't come for a long time. When it did, it was deep and dreamless, the sleep of someone who has been carrying something for a very long time and has just now, for the first time, set it down. In the morning the castle smelled of November and cold stone and the particular breakfast smell that drifted up from the Great Hall and infiltrated every corridor. Harry woke to find Hermione already sitting cross-legged on her bed with a quill and 3 sheets of parchment covered in notes. Ron was still asleep, one arm hanging off the cot, snoring with magnificent commitment. Pomfrey came out of her office with a tray of breakfast things and set it on the table between the beds without comment. She looked at Harry with a direct, professional gaze that nevertheless contained a great deal of the previous night's conversation, and said, "You may leave after you eat. Take the day if you need it. I've noted in the record that I've recommended a restorative day following last night's incident." Harry looked at her. "Thank you. There is one more thing." She reached into her apron pocket and produced a small sealed envelope, which she held out to Harry. "The copy to Gringotts requires your signature and blood seal to be accepted as a deposited record from a vault holder. I'll send it with the Morning Owl post. You'll want to sign it before you go." Harry took the envelope, broke the inner seal, and signed his name at the bottom of the documentation inside. He pressed his thumb to the signature line and felt the small, familiar sting of a blood seal activating, magic confirming identity, the most irrefutable form of consent in the wizarding world. He handed it back. "One more thing," Pomfrey said, which she had already said once. She said it anyway. "Professor Dumbledore will call the teaching staff to his office this morning for the post-incident review. He does this after every significant event. I will be required to attend and provide my medical report." She paused. "My medical report will state that I performed routine post-trauma scans on all 3 students involved in last night's incident, that I found no injuries requiring treatment beyond standard care, and that all students were discharged fit for classes." Harry looked at her steadily. "That's accurate." "Yes," Pomfrey said. "It is. A beat. My diagnostic enhancement documentation is filed separately from my medical reports. They are not the same document." She picked up the tray and went back to her office. Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione looked back at him over the tops of her parchment pages. "She's very precise," Hermione said. "Yeah," Harry said. He pulled on his robes. "I think that's how she lives with herself." He ate breakfast standing up, watching the morning light come through the high windows and thinking about the day ahead, the library, the law section, the fourth shelf from the back. The things he needed to find. The things he already knew. The gap between them. 56 tracking charms and 12 marriage contracts, all bearing the same signature. A man who had smiled at him across the great hall. A man who had said, "I don't suppose you remember me, Harry," knowing very well that Harry couldn't, because the magic placed on him before he could speak had made sure of that. Harry put down his fork, straightened his robes, and looked at the window. He wasn't afraid. He'd established that somewhere in the middle of the night, between the sleep that didn't come and the sleep that finally did. He wasn't afraid because fear was useful when you didn't know what was coming, and now he knew. Now he had the shape of it. And the shape of it, while large and significant and genuinely dangerous, was not the shapeless terrible unknown thing that fear required. It was a problem. A complicated, serious, legally actionable problem. Harry Potter had been solving problems since he was small enough to fit in a cupboard, and the problems had mostly been much larger than him. This one, for the first time, felt manageable. He picked up his bag, waited for Hermione to finish her notes, and together they walked out of the hospital wing into the November morning. Ron caught up with them at the corridor junction, robes half-buttoned, toast in hand, and slightly out of breath. "Wait," he said. "We're doing this, then? We're actually doing this?" "Yes," Harry said. Ron took a large bite of toast. Chewed. Nodded. "Right," he said. "What do we need?" Harry told him. By the time they reached the library, Harry had a list of 7 specific legal texts, 2 historical records, and one very particular name that he'd found in his memory from the orientation materials every first year received in September, a name that appeared at the bottom of a list of Hogwarts staff as an advisory contact for student welfare concerns. A name that was not Dumbledore's. A name that was, in fact, connected to the ministry. He kept that piece to himself for now, turning it over, checking its edges. He had learned, in 11 years of existing in a house where information was power and the wrong word at the wrong moment could mean a week without meals, to keep the best pieces back until the moment they were most useful. The library opened at 8. They were waiting outside the doors at 7:58. In his office at the top of a winding staircase, behind a door with a griffin knocker, a man with half-moon spectacles was pouring his morning tea and humming to himself. And one of his instruments, a small golden compass on the third shelf from the left, one of many, one of the quiet workhorses of his private information architecture, had registered a disturbance last night and then gone still, and he was looking at it now with a slight frown and the beginning of a thought that he hadn't quite finished yet. He would finish it eventually. But by then, Harry Potter would have been in the library for 3 hours. And Hermione Granger, who read at approximately twice the speed of anyone else in their year, would have found precisely what they needed. Chapter 2, The Archive. The law section of Hogwarts Library was not where most students went voluntarily. It occupied the back quarter of the 4th-floor stacks, tucked behind magical theory and largely ignored by everyone except 7th-year students suffering through their Newt's preparation and the occasional second-year Ravenclaw who had read everything else. The books there didn't have dramatic titles. They had long gray spines with text in small serious fonts: Wizarding Contract Law, Principles and Practice, 7th ed., the Hogwarts Charter and its Legal Descendants, A Practitioner's Guide to Custodial Magic Misuse, and, slightly wedged behind its neighbors as though it had been reshelved in a hurry, Betrothal Magic in British Wizarding Law, Historical Context and Current Statute. Hermione found the last one in approximately 4 minutes. Harry found the Custodial Magic Misuse book in 6, because he'd been given the exact shelf number by his own memory and he trusted his own memory more than most things. Ron stationed himself at the end of the stacks facing the library entrance, on the reasonable grounds that if anyone was coming, he'd see them first. What am I looking for specifically? Hermione asked, already opening the betrothal book with the reverence of someone handling a primary source. Whether contracts placed on a preverbal child without the knowledge of the other family's guardians are automatically void, or whether they require legal action to void, Harry said. He pulled the custodial magic misuse book onto the reading table and opened it to the index. And whether there's a time limit on challenging them. Section 4, Hermione said, without looking up. She'd gone straight to the table of contents and was running her finger down it at speed. Section 4 what? Section 4 of the betrothal regulations. I'm looking for it now. She flipped pages with the focused urgency of someone solving an actual problem rather than completing homework. Here. Preverbal betrothal contracts, age of consent provisions. She read in silence for a moment, eyes moving fast. Right. So. A betrothal contract placed on a subject under the age of 2 is considered a provisional instrument, not a binding one. It cannot be enforced without the consent of the subject upon reaching magical majority, which is 17, or upon receiving their Hogwarts letter if that comes first, because receiving your letter is treated as the formal beginning of your magical education and Carrie's specific. She stopped. Harry. What? Receiving your Hogwarts letter is treated as the beginning of your formal magical majority process. From the date of your first letter, you have 6 months to formally challenge or void any preverbal contracts before they undergo what's called accelerated solidification. Basically they become harder to challenge, legally speaking, the longer you leave them. Harry calculated. His first letter had arrived the 31st of July. It was now the 1st of November. I have until the end of January. Yes. But, she held up a finger. But. There's a secondary provision. If the contracts were placed by a custodial authority and that custodial authority acted outside its legal remit in placing them, the 6-month provision becomes irrelevant. Fraudulent instruments can be challenged at any time. She looked at him. The question is whether we can prove the custodial authority acted fraudulently. If he sold them, Harry said. If there was financial exchange, then they're fraudulent by definition. A custodian cannot sell their ward's contractual rights. Full stop. She turned a page. That's in the Custodial Misuse Act. Actually, it's in both books. They cross-reference. She picked up her quill and started writing. What are you finding? Harry had been reading his own book while she talked, running his finger down the relevant passages with the efficient reading style of someone who had done a great deal of homework under suboptimal conditions, bad light, not much time, the looming awareness that time spent reading was time not spent doing things that might get him punished. He'd developed a talent for extracting the essential sentence from a paragraph quickly. The custodial authority provisions, he said. Dumbledore is my magical custodian because my parents named him in their will as emergency magical guardian in the event of their deaths. That's standard practice. Apparently, magical families name a magical custodian separate from a legal guardian, because Muggle guardians can't manage magical affairs. So the Dursleys are your legal guardians but he has magical custodianship. Yes. But here's the thing. Harry put his finger on the line. Magical custodianship under the 1967 Revised Guardianship Act carries a specific duty of care clause. The custodian is legally required to act in the best magical and personal interests of the ward, and any magical instrument placed on the ward without their knowledge, once they're old enough to understand what's been placed, must be disclosed within a reasonable period. He looked up. First year is considered the threshold. I'm in first year. Hermione stared at him. So he was legally required to tell you about the tracking charms this year. And the contracts. And he didn't. He hasn't said a word. Harry turned the page. Which makes the failure to disclose a custodial violation regardless of whether the contracts are fraudulent. Hermione sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment with the expression of someone doing rapid mental arithmetic. So we have potentially fraudulent instruments, confirmed custodial violations, and 56 tracking charms that were placed without consent. She came back down from the ceiling. The tracking charms, what's the law on those? Working on it. Harry found the relevant section. Read it twice. Tracking charms placed on a minor by their custodial authority without disclosure are in a legal gray area if the custodian claims they're for the ward's protection. But 56, he looked at the page. There's case law here. A custodian challenged in 1972 for placing 17 tracking charms on a ward was found to have exceeded reasonable protective measures. 17 was considered excessive. The judgment uses the phrase disproportionate surveillance. He closed the book. I have 56. That's not disproportionate surveillance, Hermione said. That's imprisonment. Ron, from the end of the stacks, said quietly, someone's coming. Both of them went still. Harry heard footsteps, not the brisk decisive footsteps of a teacher on a mission, but the slow ambling footsteps of a student with no particular destination. A fourth year, by the sound, who browsed the charms section for a minute and then wandered back out. Clear, Ron said. Harry exhaled. Then he went back to the book. They spent another 2 hours in the law section, and by the end of it Hermione had filled 4.5 sheets of parchment with notes organized under headings: fraudulent instruments, custodial violations, tracking charm excess, relevant case law, and, at the bottom of the last page, a short section labeled what we still need that contained 3 items. She pushed the notes across the table to Harry. He read them. The what we still need section said, 1. Gringotts Vault transaction records. 2. Identity of the 12 contract families. 3. A qualified legal examiner or ministry contact willing to act independently of Dumbledore. The Gringotts records, Harry said. Those come by owl. I could write today. The letter needs to be very specific, Hermione said. If you just ask for transaction records they'll send a summary. You need to request a full audit of all transactions made on the Trust Vault from October 1981 to present, with particular attention to any instruments signed under custodial authority. She was already uncapping her quill. I'll draft it. You know how to write to Gringotts? I read the vault management section in the Guide to Gringotts Services on the train in September, she said, as though this were entirely normal. I wasn't sure when it would be relevant. Harry looked at her for a moment. Hermione. What? You're quite something. She went slightly pink and focused on the parchment. The letter, she said firmly. She drafted it in 7 minutes. It was precise, formal, and contained 3 separate legal citations that Harry suspected most adult wizards wouldn't have managed. He read it through, made one change, adding a request that all communications be routed directly to him through Gringotts Secure Student Owl Service, not through the school's General Owl Post, which went through the Ollery and was, technically, accessible to anyone with Hogwarts staff authority, and signed it. Good catch, Hermione said. He has 56 ways of knowing where I am, Harry said. I don't want him also having access to my mail. Ron came around the end of the stacks and sat in a third chair at the table. He'd been quiet all morning in the way he sometimes went quiet, not the disengaged quiet of someone who wasn't paying attention, but the focused quiet of someone who was paying very close attention and processing it through. Harry had noticed this about Ron in September. He catalogued people. Can I ask something? Ron said. Obviously, Harry said. The marriage contracts. Ron's ears were slightly red. The families that received them. You said 12. If some of them are, do you think any of them are? He stopped. Restarted. My family isn't on those contracts, right? Because I'd have known. My mum would have, he stopped again. She would have told me. I think. Harry looked at him. Ron was watching the table, and his expression had the particular quality of someone asking a question they were afraid might reveal something unpleasant about people they loved. I don't know which families yet, Harry said. We don't have that information. But, he chose his words with care. Your mum seems like the kind of person who would have come to you herself if she'd received a contract. Ron looked up. Yeah, he said. Yeah, she would. She'd have, a pause. A faint, complicated smile. She'd have written 17 letters about it and showed up at Hogwarts in person. Then I don't think you're on the list, Harry said. Ron nodded. Looked at the table again. But someone is, he said. 12 someones. A pause. Do you think some of them didn't know it was dodgy? The families, I mean. Like maybe they thought it was all legitimate. It was a good question. Harry had been thinking about it since the middle of the previous night. Some of them will have known, he said. Some of them might not have. Either way, they received a contract for a child without that child's knowledge or consent, and they kept it. He paused. That's something they have to live with. But it also means some of them might be more willing to cooperate than others when this comes out. Hermione looked up from her notes. You're thinking of approaching them. Eventually. Not yet. Harry folded the Gringotts letter and put it in his bag. First I need the vault records. Once I know if money changed hands, I know what I'm dealing with. If Dumbledore sold 12 contracts, then some families paid for them. That's different from families who received them as political arrangements. He stood up, pushing his chair back. There's a difference between someone who paid for a contract on a baby and someone who accepted one as a favor. Legally and morally. Hermione and Ron both looked at him. What? Harry said. Nothing, Hermione said. She stopped. You think about this differently than I do. I go straight to the legal framework. You go straight to people. People are the framework, Harry said. The law is just what happens when people decide to write their choices down. He picked up his bag. We need to send the letter before breakfast ends. The school owls will be active for another 30 minutes. They packed the books back, Hermione with the meticulous care of someone who respected the system, Harry with the efficiency of someone who needed to move, and left the law section the way they'd come, through the back of the stacks, emerging into the main body of the library where a handful of other students were reading with the comfortable disengagement of people for whom this was a normal morning. None of them looked twice at 3 first-years carrying books and parchment. Harry noted this too. He was accustomed to being overlooked. He had spent 11 years perfecting the art of moving through spaces without drawing attention, and he was very good at it. The difference now was that he was choosing to use it. They went to the Ollery. Hedwig was there. She saw Harry come through the door and tilted her head at him with the particular attentiveness she reserved for when he was bothered about something, not frantic, not visibly distressed, but carrying something, the way he sometimes carried things so quietly that they were practically invisible. She hopped to his arm before he'd called her, and he stroked her head for a moment longer than strictly necessary. Gringotts, he said, attaching the letter. Directly to the vault manager. Not through the main post. Hedwig regarded him for a moment with the amber-eyed seriousness of someone who was going to do this exactly right. Then she opened her wings and was out the window and gone, white against the grey November sky. When will they write back? Ron asked. A few days. Goblins are thorough. Harry watched Hedwig until she was a speck. We use the time to work on the third problem. The legal contact, Hermione said. Yes. Harry turned from the window. McGonagall said there was someone in Hogsmeade. A legal examiner. Do you know who she means? Hermione thought about it. There's a wizarding solicitor's office in Hogsmeade. Kettleburn and Associates. They handle Hogwarts-adjacent matters, student welfare, scholarship disputes, that sort of thing. But they'd be too small for something this significant. She chewed her lip. For something that involves Wizengamot-level violations, you'd want someone with ministry connections but independent of the ministry hierarchy, because Dumbledore has significant influence over the ministry and we don't know yet how deep that runs. There's the Wizengamot Oversight Committee, Ron said. Both Harry and Hermione looked at him. He shrugged. My dad works at the ministry. I hear things. There's an oversight committee specifically for cases where ministry officials might have conflicts of interest. They're independent of the Wisengamot itself. Do you know how to contact them? Harry asked. No. But my dad might. Ron's expression was uncertain. Which means telling my parents. Is that a problem? No. I mean, Ron ran a hand through his hair. My mum's going to react like, a lot. And my dad's going to want to help, which is good, except he doesn't have a lot of pull at the ministry, Harry. He's head of the misuse of Muggle artifacts office. He's not exactly, he's an honest man with ministry access who isn't connected to Dumbledore's network, Harry said. Right now that's worth more than pull. Ron looked at him. Something settled in his expression. Right. I'll write to him today. They came down out of the Ollery into the Saturday morning castle, a Saturday on which, Harry realized, the troll attack was already the primary gossip currency of every student corridor, being traded and embellished and reshaped in real time as it passed from group to group. He heard his own name 3 times before he reached the 4th-floor landing, in 3 different versions of a story that was recognizably about the same event and substantially wrong in all 3 cases. In one version Harry had apparently defeated the troll single-handedly using a spell from 6th-year curriculum. In another, the troll had been a deliberate planted attack. Harry said nothing to any of it. Let it move around him. He had things to do. The first thing was breakfast. The second was to attend the brief mandatory post-incident check-in with head of house that McGonagall had sent word about that morning. The third was to find, without drawing attention, the reference Madame Pomfrey had made the previous night to a contact, a name at the bottom of a list of Hogwarts staff that Harry had read in September and filed away. He found what he was looking for during breakfast, when the morning post arrived and the usual flurry of owls descended on the great hall, and in the middle of that flurry he watched, with the calm, cataloguing attention that had served him well for 11 years, which owls went to which tables, and whether any of them carried official correspondence. A large tawny owl went to the staff table. It landed in front of Professor Flitwick, who opened the letter, read it, and made a small note in a ledger that he kept on the staff table on Saturdays. The ledger had a ministry crest on the cover. Harry looked at that ledger for a moment and then looked away before anyone could notice him looking. Phileas Flitwick was the charms professor and head of Ravenclaw House and, according to the student advisory notice posted in the first-year common room in September, the school liaison for student rights and welfare, Ministry of Magic Department of Magical Education. It had been at the bottom of the list, under a heading that said External Advisory Staff in a font small enough that most students didn't bother reading it. Harry had read it. He'd read everything. He looked at his porridge and thought about that. Then the post-incident check-in with McGonagall came, and Harry sat in her office for 20 minutes, and it was a perfectly ordinary meeting on the surface. She asked if he was all right, he said yes, she said the troll situation was being investigated, he nodded, except that underneath it was something else entirely. McGonagall's eyes kept moving to his face the way eyes do when looking for something specific, and Harry let her look, because she'd been honest with him last night and he owed her the same. When she reached the end of the official questions, she folded her hands on the desk and said, "I've made inquiries this morning." Quietly. Harry waited. "The legal examiner in Hogsmeade is a qualified contract specialist," she said. "She handles Hogwarts-adjacent matters and has ministry certification for diagnostic instrument results as legal evidence." A pause. "I've arranged for her to come to the castle on Monday, ostensibly for a student welfare review. These are routine and not notable." Another pause, more weighted. "I want you to understand that I'm doing this in my capacity as deputy headmistress and head of Gryffindor House, and that my primary obligation is to the welfare of my students." "Not to the headmaster?" Harry asked. McGonagall looked at him directly. "My obligation to the headmaster is professional. My obligation to my students is," she seemed to search for the word, "fundamental." Harry nodded. "Monday," he said. Thank you. Be careful today, she said, as he stood to leave. He will call you to his office eventually. He does this after every significant event involving you. He will be warm and he will be kind and he will ask how you're feeling. And I should say. Say whatever you need to say, McGonagall said. But do not tell him what you found. Harry picked up his bag. He has 56 ways of tracking where I've been, he said. He knows I was in the library this morning. Yes. So he'll already suspect something. Possibly. Then it doesn't matter if I'm a little less careful about being invisible. Harry looked at her steadily. It might actually help to give him something to track. Something normal. So he's watching the normal thing while the important things happen somewhere else. McGonagall was quiet for a moment. Mr. Potter, she said, and her voice had something in it that was almost, not quite, admiring, you are occasionally rather frightening. I've been told I take after my father, Harry said. I'm beginning to think I might take after my mother. He left before she could respond to that, which was, he acknowledged, slightly theatrical. But sometimes theatrical was the right choice. The corridor outside was cool and quiet, the morning settling into its Saturday pace, students moving in loose groups toward Quidditch practice and the common rooms and the library. Harry fell in with the flow of them, thinking and not thinking at the same time, the way he sometimes managed to do. When Dumbledore's summons arrived, a small scroll delivered by a school owl that intercepted Harry on the second-floor landing at 11, Harry was ready for it. He read it. Pocketed it. Continued toward the common room. Hermione fell into step beside him. She'd been a step behind him on the stairs, having spent the post-McGonagall period in the library pulling 3 more books, and she looked at him with the question in her eyes. He's called me up, Harry said quietly. Are you going? Yes. Now. He kept walking. Can you keep working on the case law while I'm gone? Specifically the precedent cases for fraudulent custodial instruments. We need at least 3 strong cases where the courts ruled against the custodian. I've already found 2, Hermione said. I knew you would. He gave her a brief, genuine smile. There's something else. Professor Flitwick. What about him? He's the school's ministry liaison for student welfare. Look him up in the external advisory staff listing. He has independent ministry certification. Harry took the stairs up without breaking stride. If we need someone inside the school with official standing who isn't McGonagall, someone whose authority comes from outside the Hogwarts hierarchy, Hermione's eyes lit. I'll look into it. Don't approach him yet, Harry said. Not until after Monday. I want the contract examiner to see the original documents first. He stopped at the base of the gargoyle staircase. The stone figure regarded him with stony indifference. Harry said the password, sherbet lemon, which was wrong, but the previous password had apparently been acid pops, and he tried that, and the gargoyle moved aside. He stood at the bottom of the moving staircase for a moment, listening to it spiral upward. Then he climbed. The office smelled of something sweet and smoky, the same smell that had been there in September when Dumbledore had met him, briefly, at the start of term. There were the instruments on their shelves, whirring and clicking softly. The sorting hat in its case. The portraits of previous headmasters, most of them snoozing or pretending to snooze in the way portraits did when they wanted to seem inattentive. Dumbledore was behind his desk, and his eyes lit up with the warm, particular glow that Harry was now looking at differently. The warmth was real, he thought. He didn't think it was performed. That was almost the most complicated part. Harry, Dumbledore said, rising slightly from his chair. Please, sit down. I trust you're recovering from last night's rather alarming experience. I'm fine, Harry said, sitting down. He sat with the relaxed attention of someone who had no particular agenda, which was the position he had perfected over 11 years of living with people he couldn't fully trust. Not hostile. Not closed. Just, present, and watching. Terrible business with the troll, Dumbledore said, settling back. We've been unable to determine definitively how it found its way inside the castle. Professor Quirrell is understandably shaken. He was the one who raised the alarm, you may recall. He poured 2 cups of tea from a pot on his desk and pushed one toward Harry with the smooth hospitality of someone who did this often. Madame Pomfrey tells me she found you all in good health this morning. I'm glad to hear it. She was very thorough, Harry said. He picked up the tea. She always is. Dumbledore looked at him over his spectacles with that particular attention, not uncomfortable, not obviously searching, just the steady attention of a man who was very used to understanding people. You handled yourself with remarkable composure, from what I understand. Your wand work saved Miss Granger. Ron's levitation charm saved her, Harry said. I just distracted the troll. A dangerous thing to do. Less dangerous than not doing it, Harry said. Dumbledore smiled. Indeed. He drank his tea. Harry drank his. The instruments whirred and clicked. One of them, the golden compass on the 3rd shelf, the one Dumbledore had glanced at this morning with a slight frown, rotated in its small circle, steady and regular. Harry looked at it for a moment, then looked away. Professor Dumbledore, Harry said, with the tone of a student asking a genuine question, when I have Gringotts questions, about my vault, about my family's estate, is there a proper process for that? Or do I just write to them directly? He watched the slightest thing happen on Dumbledore's face. The briefest adjustment. Not alarm, nothing so legible as that, but a recalibration, the tiny movement of a man who has been asked a question that didn't come from a natural innocent curiosity but from somewhere else, and is trying to determine how far it came from. Your vault manager at Gringotts is always available to you, Dumbledore said pleasantly. They respond to direct correspondence from vault holders at any age. Though for significant decisions, it is sometimes wise to have guidance from, a small pause, someone experienced in these matters. From you? Harry asked. Or from any trusted adult in your life, Dumbledore said, with the warmth fully intact. I hope you know, Harry, that I am always available to you for such things. Your family's situation is complex, and I have always considered it part of my responsibility to, are you my magical custodian? Harry asked. The question sat in the air between them. Dumbledore set his teacup down. The movement was unhurried. His expression remained warm. But the golden compass on the 3rd shelf did something subtle, it rotated, and then stopped, and then rotated again, and Harry watched it without appearing to watch it and understood that it was a tracker that tracked something, and that something had just changed. I have served in a custodial advisory role for you since your parents' passing, Dumbledore said. It is a responsibility I take with the utmost seriousness, Harry. Everything I have done in that capacity has been done with your well-being as the first consideration. Harry looked at him. Dumbledore looked back, and behind the warmth and the spectacles and the considerable intelligence was something that Harry now recognized as a man who had spent a very long time being the person in the room who knew more than everyone else, and was faintly, almost imperceptibly, unsettled by the possibility that this might not be one of those times. I appreciate that, Harry said. He put his teacup down and stood up, smooth and unhurried, the way he'd come in. I should get to lunch. Saturday is the only day I actually manage to eat before noon. Of course. Dumbledore rose with him. Harry, if anything is concerning you, from last night or otherwise, my door is always open. Thank you, Harry said. He smiled, politely and genuinely and without any of the things underneath it showing, and went to the door. Behind him, he heard the golden compass begin its rotation again, steady and tracking. He felt the familiar invisible weight of it, the sensation of being watched that he'd never been able to articulate before because he'd had no framework for it. Now he did. He went down the spiral staircase and through the gargoyle and into the corridor, and he thought, he knows something is different. He doesn't know what. I have until he figures out what. He walked toward the great hall for lunch, and he thought about the golden compass, and the 12 contracts, and the vault records, and Monday, and Flitwick, and something else, something that had been pressing at the edge of his thoughts since the night before and which he'd been deliberately not looking at because it required him to feel something rather than think something. His parents had named Dumbledore as his magical custodian. They had trusted him. James and Lily Potter had gone into hiding under the Fidelius charm and trusted their secret to a man who, Harry didn't know yet, exactly. He didn't know enough yet. But he was beginning to have the shape of a question he hadn't known to ask. If Dumbledore had been his magical custodian since October 1981, since the night his parents died, then who had been his custodian before that? What had his parents intended? And had Dumbledore's custodianship been something they'd chosen, or something that had happened to them in the same way things had been happening to Harry his entire life? He carried that thought to lunch, where Ron was already on his third bread roll and Hermione had a book open next to her plate and was reading and eating with the absent-minded multitasking of someone who genuinely found both activities equally important. "Anything?" Harry asked, sitting down. Hermione looked up. She glanced around briefly, confirming who was nearby, then leaned slightly in and said quietly, 3 precedent cases. All found against the custodian. The strongest one is from 1958, a case called in re. Rosier, where a custodian placed 9 pre-verbal contracts on 2 wards and was found to have sold them to the highest bidders within specific political factions. Stripped of custodial authority, significant financial penalties, and all contracts were voided with full back payment to the wards of any proceeds received. She paused. The judge's language was very strong. He used the phrase, an exploitation of sacred trust amounting to the commodification of human life. How old were the children when it went to the Waisengemot? Harry asked. One was 8. One was 12. She looked at him. The 12-year-old initiated the proceedings himself with the help of a school official. Harry ate a forkful of food. Looked at the table. Looked up. Flitwick, he said quietly. Hermione nodded. School liaison for student rights and welfare, she said. He has independent ministry certification, full legal standing to receive and process complaint documentation on behalf of students, and his authority derives from the Department of Magical Education, not from the Hogwarts Board of Governors. Which Dumbledore sits on, Ron said, mouth slightly full. Yes, Harry said. And which means any formal complaint lodged through a Hogwarts board channel goes directly through Dumbledore's network. He thought for a moment. But through Flitwick, it goes to the Department of Magical Education, which reports to the Minister's office. Dumbledore has influence there too, Hermione said. Yes. But influence is different from authority. Harry drank his pumpkin juice. He can lean on people. He can't control a formally lodged complaint with witness documentation and 3 independent legal precedents. He paused. Especially not if the Gringotts records show financial exchange. They ate in silence for a moment. There's one more thing, Hermione said. She hesitated, which was unusual enough that both Harry and Ron looked at her. I found a reference in one of the older case histories. In the Rosier case and 2 others involving custodial violations, the ward's magical signature showed evidence of what the documents call suppressive layering. She kept her voice very quiet. It's a known side effect of excessive charm stacking on a magical minor. The accumulated weight of multiple external constructs placed on a developing magical core it essentially pushes the core inward. Compresses it. The child's magic becomes, she stopped. Started again more carefully. Less than it should be. Smaller than it's supposed to be. The great hall noise moved around them. How much smaller? Harry said. The documentation is vague. But in the Rosier case, when the charms were removed from the wards, both children experienced what was described as a significant and immediate increase in ambient magical output. She looked at him steadily. Harry, you have 56 tracking charms layered on you. Each one is a construct sitting on top of your magical core. When they're removed, I'll be different, Harry said. You'll be yourself, Hermione said. Possibly for the first time. Ron was very quiet at Harry's other side. Harry didn't look at him for a moment because he needed a second to put the thing Hermione had just said somewhere manageable before it became something that stopped him moving. 11 years. 11 years in which he hadn't been able to do magic, couldn't do magic, wasn't supposed to do magic, and when it happened anyway it was always accidental and always wrong and always made things worse. 11 years in which he'd been told by his aunt and uncle that there was something wrong with him and by the world at large that there was something exceptional about him, and he'd had no framework for either, just the silent grinding feeling of someone living inside a life that didn't quite fit. And now there was a word for it. Suppressive layering. Right, Harry said, and his voice was steady. Then the charm removal isn't just about the legal case. No, Hermione said quietly. It's about actually being able to, he stopped. To function. Yes. Good, Harry said. That goes on the list. He ate the rest of his lunch. He was hungry, genuinely and straightforwardly hungry in the way he often wasn't when things were pressing on him. He ate deliberately, with the attention of someone doing a mundane thing well, and he thought about the golden compass in Dumbledore's office and the legal examiner coming on Monday and the Gringotts letter traveling north with Hedwig and the sealed crystal rod in Pomfrey's cabinet. He thought about 56 charms sitting on his magical core like 56 stones stacked on a person's chest. He thought about what it would feel like to have them removed. Then he stopped thinking about that, because it was the kind of thought that, if you let it get too large, would take up all the space you needed for practical things, and he had a great many practical things left to do. The afternoon passed. Harry went to the common room and read through Hermione's case law notes twice, memorizing the key precedents. Ron wrote his letter to his father, pausing every few minutes to stare at it and cross things out and rewrite them, clearly trying to find the version that conveyed the necessary urgency without causing his mother to have a cardiac event by owl. He settled eventually on something that was factual and brief and handed it to Errol, the Weasley family owl, with the air of someone posting a letter into a volcano. Sunday was quieter. McGonagall sent word that the legal examiner, a woman named Delphine Marchetti, would arrive Monday morning at 9, before classes, and that the meeting would take place in a small office on the 4th floor generally used for student welfare reviews and which had, notably, no portraits in it. Old stone, no ears. Harry went to sleep Sunday night thinking about Monday, and about the sealed instruments in Pomfrey's cabinet, and about the brass circle and its number. 12. 12 families who had received contracts for a baby they'd never met. He thought about which 12 it might be. He turned it over in his mind like a puzzle with some pieces visible and most of them not. Some families would be political. Some would be financial. Some would be both. He tried to think about which families in the wizarding world had enough standing for Dumbledore to consider the alliance worth making and enough connection to him to make the arrangement plausible. There were obvious guesses. He set them aside. Guessing was noise, evidence was signal. But there was one guess that kept coming back regardless. Not a Death Eater family. Not a political connection. Something stranger than that, the nagging awareness that not all 12 contracts would be hostile. Some might have been placed with families who had no idea there was anything wrong with them. Some might have been placed with people who would, if they knew, be just as angry as Harry was. He thought about that for a long time. In the morning, there was a letter from Hedwig. It had arrived before breakfast, dropped at the end of his dormitory bed with the particular precision that Hedwig brought to everything, and Harry opened it before he was fully awake and read it sitting up in the grey Monday morning light while his dormitory mates slept. It was from Gringotts. Not the full audit, that would take longer, but an acknowledgement of receipt, and with it, a preliminary notice. The preliminary notice said, in the flat impersonal language of goblins who had no interest in softening information, initial review of the James and Lily Potter Trust Vault has identified 17 transactions made under custodial authority between November 1981 and present. 3 of the 17 transactions have been flagged for anomalous classification. Full audit report to follow within 5 to 7 business days. Vault access has been noted as requested by the registered vault holder, further communications will be directed accordingly. 3 transactions flagged as anomalous. Harry folded the letter and put it in his robes and sat for a moment in the early quiet of the dormitory with the sleeping sounds of Neville and Seamus and Dean around him, and he thought about those 3 transactions, and what they might have bought, and for whom. Then he got dressed, woke Ron with a hand on the shoulder, and went downstairs to meet Hermione. At 9 o'clock, in a small 4th-floor office with stone walls and no portraits and one long table with 4 chairs, Delphine Marchetti arrived. She was shorter than Harry had expected, shorter than McGonagall, with dark hair pulled back and the brisk, assessing manner of someone who spent their professional life looking at complicated situations and finding the critical load-bearing point. She had a leather case with her, and a wand holstered at her wrist rather than her hip, and she looked at Harry for approximately 2 seconds before extending her hand. "Mr. Potter," she said. "I've been briefed on the outline by Professor McGonagall. I'd like to see the original documentation." "Good morning to you too," Harry said, shaking her hand. Something shifted in her expression, a brief, unwilling reassessment. "Good morning," she said. "I apologize. I'm told you have diagnostic instrument records." "Madame Pomfrey will bring them at 9:15, McGonagall said from behind Harry. "Then let's use the time." Marchetti set her case on the table and opened it. "Tell me, in your own words, what happened and what you found. Leave nothing out." Harry sat down. He told her. He left nothing out. She listened the way very good professional people listen, without interruption, without visible reaction, taking notes in a small crisp handwriting that covered her parchment in neat lines. When he finished, she looked at her notes for a moment. "The signature on all 68 instruments was the same," she said. "Yes. And you have the crystal rod impression, the brass circle reading, and the notation from the diagnostic scanner." "Pomfrey has them." "She sealed them herself and signed the witness documentation in front of McGonagall." Marchetti nodded. "She wrote something else. You also have preliminary contact from Gringotts." Harry put the morning letter on the table. She read it, made a copy with a tap of her wand, and handed it back. 3 anomalous transactions, she said, almost to herself. "That's significant. We think at least some of the contracts had financial exchange," Harry said. "If they did," Marchetti said, "and if the full audit confirms it, then we are no longer in the territory of custodial misuse. We are in the territory of criminal fraud." She looked at him. "Do you understand the distinction? Custodial misuse is a civil violation with financial penalties and loss of authority," Harry said. "Criminal fraud is a criminal charge with potential imprisonment." Marchetti looked at him. Then at McGonagall. Then back at Harry. "You've been doing your homework." "I've been doing Hermione's homework," Harry said. "She's very good at it." Pomfrey arrived at 9:14 with the sealed instruments in a fireproof evidence case, and the meeting became something more formal. Marchetti handled the instruments with practiced efficiency, unsealing the crystal rod with the correct certification wand work, reviewing the brass circle's transferred reading, examining the diagnostic scanner record with the focused attention of someone who knew exactly what to look for. When she finished, she placed everything carefully on the table and looked at it for a moment. "This is a complete record," she said. "The instruments are certified, the readings are clear, the signature match is confirmed." She looked up. "Professor McGonagall, I need to file a preliminary notice with the Department of Magical Education today. Not a formal complaint, not yet, but a preliminary notice that activates my independent authority to investigate and places this matter under ministry oversight." McGonagall nodded. "Once that notice is filed," Marchetti continued, "the headmaster cannot legally order the destruction or alteration of any evidence related to this matter. Including records he may hold himself." She looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter, I also need you to understand that once this process begins, it cannot easily be stopped. Not by you, not by me, not by anyone except the department and the Wisengamot Oversight Committee." "I understand," Harry said. "You understand that it will become public." Yes. You understand that the person this involves is, she paused. Something moved across her face. Is not someone that most of the wizarding world will want to believe acted wrongly. Harry looked at her steadily. I know who it is, he said. I know how people think about him. I also know what the instruments say. A pause. The instruments don't care how famous he is. Marchetti looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her case and produced a formal ministry notification form, and she began to fill it in, and the morning light came through the one small window of the fourth-floor office and fell across the table where all the evidence was laid out, clean and irrefutable, and Harry watched the ink dry on the form and felt something in his chest that was not triumph and not relief but something in the neighborhood of both, a quiet, settled sense of momentum, of the world beginning. Slowly and with appropriate legal procedure, to correct itself. Outside, the castle was waking up. Students were moving toward the great hall for breakfast, toward classrooms for the first lessons of the week, through the corridors in groups and pairs and alone, carrying the ordinary weight of a Monday morning. Somewhere in the school, behind a door with a griffin knocker, a man with half-moon spectacles was looking at a golden compass that had been behaving unusually for 2 days and was beginning, perhaps, to form a more specific version of his unfinished thought. Harry picked up his bag. The preliminary notice was filed by 9:45. Chapter 3, The removal. The notice reached the Department of Magical Education at 10:10 on Monday morning, and by 11:30, someone at the department had forwarded it to the Wisengamot Oversight Committee, because that was protocol when a preliminary notice involved a named individual of significant public standing. By noon, the Oversight Committee had assigned a case number. By 1 o'clock, a senior committee official named Aldous Croker, not the unspeakable, a different Croker, though equally humorless, had sent a return owl to Marchetti authorizing her to proceed with full evidence collection and directing her to secure the physical evidence against interference. Harry knew none of this until Marchetti sent a brief note to McGonagall at lunch. McGonagall read it at the staff table with an expression of careful neutrality that told Harry, from across the great hall, that it contained something significant. She looked up, found him watching, and gave the smallest possible nod. He ate his lunch. Hermione, sitting across from him, was watching his face. Good news? Moving news, Harry said. I don't know yet if it's good. Ron was stress-eating, which for Ron was largely indistinguishable from regular eating except that he was slightly quieter. He'd had a return letter from his father that morning, delivered by a ministry owl rather than Errol, which had made Ron's eyebrows go up, and he'd read it twice and then folded it and put it in his pocket and said, "Dad's taking it seriously," in a tone that suggested this was both reassuring and slightly terrifying. What did he say exactly? Hermione asked. He said he's been aware of some irregularities in ministry administrative records connected to Harry's guardianship file for the past 2 years. Ron pulled the letter back out and found the line. He said, "Here, I have had concerns I was not in a position to pursue alone, but in light of what you've described, I believe there may be others who have waited for exactly this kind of formal catalyst." And then he told me to tell Harry to be careful and to trust McGonagall. He already knew something was off, Harry said. Apparently. Ron refolded the letter. My dad isn't, he's not high up. But he sees a lot of paperwork that other people don't think is important enough to hide. He looked at Harry. He's going to reach out to someone at the Oversight Committee. Quietly. Croker already assigned a case number, Harry said, and watched Ron blink. How do you know that? McGonagall's expression, Harry said. She reads official correspondence the same way every time. There's a specific thing her face does when there's a case number involved. I've been watching her handle paperwork since September. Ron stared at him for a moment. Hermione made the small sound she made when she found something simultaneously impressive and slightly unnerving. Right, Ron said. You just know things about people. I pay attention, Harry said. It's free. After lunch came the thing Harry had been waiting for and not entirely looking forward to. Madame Pomfrey had sent word that morning that the charm removal could, technically, be performed any time after the legal notice was filed. The filing created a formal record of what was being removed and why, which protected both the practitioner and the subject from any claim that the removal was unsanctioned. She'd also sent word that she'd consulted overnight with a specialist in external charm removal, a healer from St. Mungo's who had dealt with suppressive layering cases before. The specialist's name was Healer Vasquez, and she arrived at the castle just before 2 o'clock with a bag that was considerably larger than Pomfrey's and an energy that was efficient without being brusque, the kind of professional ease that came from having done something many times and still taking it seriously every time. She met Harry in the hospital wing with Pomfrey, McGonagall, and Marchetti all present, because Marchetti had insisted on a legal witness for the removal process. "You've read about what happens when suppressive charms are removed?" Vasquez asked. She was looking at Harry with the direct assessment of a healer, cataloging things, not just the physical surface of him, but the magical surface, which she apparently could read with her bare eyes the way some people could see auras. "There's an increase in ambient magical output," Harry said. "The core has been compressed, and when the external constructs are removed, it expands back. More or less." Vasquez set her bag on the examination table and began unpacking with practiced efficiency. "The process itself isn't painful. It can be disorienting. Some people feel a significant physical sensation when the individual charms are released. Some people feel nothing until the last few, and then feel everything at once." She glanced at him. "I don't know which you'll be. Everyone is different. What I can tell you is that your core has been under external pressure since before you were old enough to understand what magic was, so when it releases, and it will release, the experience may be," she paused, choosing her word. "Large." "Large," Harry said. "Large," she confirmed, without apology. "All right." Harry sat on the examination table. "There's one more thing." She pulled out an instrument he hadn't seen before, flat, circular, about the size of a dinner plate, with concentric rings etched into its surface in decreasing size. "This is a containment buffer. It won't suppress the release, but it will give it a direction, outward and upward, toward the ceiling, away from the people in the room. We use it so that when the energy releases, it doesn't hit anyone." She placed it on the floor beneath the examination table. "As a courtesy." "As a courtesy," Harry said. "You might also break some things," she said cheerfully. "Glassware, instruments, that sort of thing. Nothing structural, probably. The castle is very well warded." She smiled at him with the professional warmth of someone who genuinely liked their work. "Ready?" Harry looked at the ceiling for a moment. He thought about 56 stones stacked on a person's chest and about what it felt like to breathe properly for the first time. "Yes," he said. Vasquez raised her wand. The first charm came off like a thread being pulled from cloth. Harry felt it before he heard it, a small discreet loosening somewhere below his sternum, and then a faint musical tone as the construct dissolved, and then a tiny bloom of warmth that spread outward from his core like a single ember catching air. He exhaled. "One," Vasquez said. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Harry said. "That was nothing. They won't all be nothing." She moved her wand in the same careful arc and found the second construct. "Some of them are very old. Some of them were placed when you were very small and have been there so long they've integrated with your natural channels." A pause. "Those will feel different." The second charm came off. The warmth again, slightly larger this time. The containment buffer beneath him caught the ambient release and directed it upward, and Harry actually saw, a faint shimmer in the air above the examination table, like heat rising from summer pavement. Third. Fourth. Fifth. Each one a small unclenching, a tiny increment of space returning to something that had been compressed without his knowledge for his entire life. By the 10th charm, the shimmer above the table had become something more visible, a distortion of light, and the temperature in the hospital wing had risen by several degrees. Pomfrey opened a window. McGonagall stood by the wall with her arms folded and her expression doing something careful and controlled that Harry couldn't read from the examination table but suspected was significant. "We're entering the older ones now," Vasquez said, "around the 12th. These were placed in the first few months of your life." There, she examined the construct at the tip of her wand with a brief clinical frown. "Dense. Complex. Whoever placed these knew exactly what they were doing." "Of course they did," Harry said. She removed it. The warmth from that one wasn't small. It spread fast and wide, and the shimmer above the table spiked, and 3 of the instrument jars on Pomfrey's counter vibrated sharply, and one of them, the one with preserved flobberworm extract, cracked clean across and sent its contents down the counter edge in a slow amber drip. "Sorry," Harry said. "Don't apologize," Vasquez said. "I told you there'd be breakage." She found the 14th. It went like that for a long time. Harry stopped counting around the 30th and started tracking it differently, by the increasing warmth in his chest, the growing sense of something loosening in him that went deeper than physical, something in the architecture of himself that he'd been moving around without ever being able to feel its edges. Each charm removed was a boundary dissolving. Each one was a small articulation of space that he hadn't known he was missing. By the 40th, the shimmer above the table had become visible to everyone in the room, a column of released magical energy rising toward the high ceiling of the hospital wing with the quality of light through moving water. Marchetti had taken 3 steps backward toward the wall. McGonagall had not moved at all. "How are you feeling?" Vasquez asked. Harry took stock. "Strange," he said. "Not bad. Strange." He looked at his hands. They looked the same. He couldn't feel any different yet, not in any specific articulable way, but there was something building in his chest that wasn't discomfort, more like pressure, but the kind of pressure that felt necessary, like the moment before something very large inhales. 45, 46, Vasquez said, releasing 2 in quick succession, and those 2 were among the oldest and the densest, and the warmth from them wasn't warmth anymore, it was heat, and the shimmer above the table briefly became a visible white bloom that faded after 2 seconds, and Harry heard Hermione, who was not supposed to be in the hospital wing and was unambiguously there anyway, make a sharp sound from behind the curtain by the door. "Miss Granger," McGonagall said, without turning her head. A pause. "I'm not here," Hermione said. McGonagall did not respond to this. Vasquez suppressed something that might have been a smile. 47. 48. 49. The hospital wing was notably warm now, the kind of warmth that made you want to open your robes, and the light coming through the windows had developed a particular quality, refracting oddly through the shimmer above the examination table. Pomfrey had her wand out and was doing something that Harry thought might be a stabilization cast on the instrument still remaining intact on her counter. 50, Vasquez said. That one hit differently. Harry felt it in his spine first, a long, deep release, like a door being forced open in a locked part of a house that had been locked since before you could remember. He made a sound he hadn't planned to make, not pain exactly, more like the involuntary exhale of something physical and significant, and the shimmer above the table doubled in width, and both windows opened themselves all the way, and the curtain behind which Hermione was not being there billowed sideways and exposed her completely. Hermione stood exactly where she'd been, hands pressed together under her chin, eyes very wide, watching the shimmer above the table with an expression that was 1 part scientific fascination and 2 parts something that looked very much like awe. 3 more, Vasquez said. She sounded perfectly steady, which Harry appreciated more than he could articulate at that moment. 51. A crack appeared in the stone of the windowsill, a hairline fracture, running from corner to corner, perfectly even, as though someone had drawn it with a ruler. 52. The column of shimmer above the table reached the ceiling and spread outward along it in a slow bright wave, and 3 more instruments on Pomfrey's counter gave up the ghost and shattered cleanly, the sound of them crisp and sharp in the strange warm air of the hospital wing. 1 more, Vasquez said. She was looking at the last tracking charm on the tip of her wand with the focused attention of a surgeon looking at the last suture. This one was the first. It was placed, very early. She glanced at Harry briefly. It has been there longer than any of the others. It's the deepest. Harry met her eyes. Take it off, he said. She removed it. What happened was not dramatic in the way explosions are dramatic, with noise and fire and things flying through the air. It was dramatic in a different way, the way that very large quiet things are dramatic. The warmth in Harry's chest reached a point that wasn't describable, and then it wasn't warmth anymore, it was light, and the shimmer above the table collapsed inward and then expanded outward simultaneously, and the containment buffer beneath the examination table blazed white for 2 seconds, and every single window in the hospital wing opened, and the cool November air came flooding in, and the column of shimmer dispersed into nothing, and the room was very still. Harry sat on the examination table and breathed. The warmth was gone. Not gone, transformed, settled, redistributed. He could feel it now in a completely different way, not as heat or pressure but as presence, the solid certain sense of something that was his, that had always been his, that was simply himself and had been compressed for so long that he'd forgotten what its full shape felt like. He looked at his hands. They looked the same. He turned one over, looking at the palm, the small scar on the heel of his hand from a fall when he was 7. Same hands. Same everything. Except. He flexed his fingers once, slowly, and felt something respond, not a specific movement, not a spell, just the raw acknowledgement from his own magic that it was there, that it was present, that it was paying attention, and the feeling of it was enormous in the way that breathing freely is enormous only after you've been breathing badly for a very long time. Mr. Potter, Vasquez said, in the tone of a professional doing a post-procedure assessment. Can you tell me your name? Harry Potter, Harry said. How many fingers am I holding up? 4. Do you feel any pain? Harry thought about it properly, a real assessment, top to bottom. No, he said. Any nausea, dizziness, spatial disorientation? No. He paused. I feel clear. That's the only word I have for it. Vasquez nodded. She made a note in her chart. Then she looked at him with the direct gaze she'd had since the beginning, and said quietly, in a register that wasn't clinical anymore, I've done this procedure 7 times in 15 years. The other 6 were adults. They all used different words, but they all meant the same thing. A pause. Clear is a good word. McGonagall made a sound. It was small and quickly controlled, but it was there, and Harry looked at her, and McGonagall was looking at the window with an expression that she was managing with the full force of her considerable composure, and that composure was nevertheless losing ground around the edges. Right, Harry said, and his voice was different. Not louder, not harder, not in any way that was easy to articulate, just more fully itself, like a signal coming through without static for the first time. What about the contracts? Marchetti, who had moved back to her position by the table during the procedure, cleared her throat professionally. The marriage contracts are legally separate from the tracking charms, she said. Their removal is a legal process, not a magical one, we void them through the Wizengamot, not through a healer. What happened today doesn't void them. It establishes the magical environment in which they were placed, which is evidence relevant to the legal proceeding. But they can be voided, Harry said. Almost certainly, Marchetti said. Given what I've seen. All 12. All 12. A pause. Though it's possible, depending on the circumstances of individual contracts, that some families may wish to maintain a relationship with you through conventional means. Not through a contract, but through choice, Harry said. Yes. Fine, Harry said. Choice is fine. Contracts aren't. He slid off the examination table and his feet touched the floor and he stood up straight. Vasquez was watching him with a clinical eye, ready to catch something if it happened, but nothing happened. He was steady. He felt very steady. Hermione appeared at his side. She looked at him with an expression that was trying to be analytical and was fundamentally something more personal than that. Well? Harry said. Your ambient magical signature has changed, she said. It's different. I can feel it from here and I'm not especially sensitive to ambient magic and you're standing 4 feet away. She paused. You feel like a room that just got significantly larger. Ron had appeared in the doorway of the hospital wing, because of course he had, and was leaning in the frame with the studied casualness of someone who had absolutely been listening from the corridor. "Silwar," he said, looking at the cracked windowsill and the 3 shattered instrument jars and the hairline fracture running across the stone. All of that was just from taking the charms off. Yes, Harry said. Imagine if you'd been a bit annoyed at the troll. Harry looked at the windowsill. Thought about that. Let's not, he said. He picked up his bag from where he'd left it by the door before the procedure. Put it over his shoulder. Looked at the room, Pomfrey cleaning up with brisk efficiency, Vasquez closing her case with the satisfied air of a job properly done, Marchetti organizing her documentation, McGonagall still looking at the window with her composure reasserting itself inch by inch. He looked at Marchetti. When does it go formally to the Wisengamot? When the Gringotts audit arrives and confirms the financial exchange, Marchetti said. That's the final piece. Without it, we have custodial violations and tracking misuse, which are serious. With it, we have fraud, which is prosecutable at the highest level. 5 to 7 business days, Harry said. He thought about those days. About living in the castle with Dumbledore for 5 to 7 more days while the audit came in, while the case built, while the preliminary notice sat on a desk at the oversight committee with a case number attached to it. Can we use the time? For what? Marchetti asked. The 12 families. Harry had been thinking about this since the hospital wing on Saturday night, and the thinking had clarified overnight, and the clarity had sharpened further during the removal procedure, and now it was very specific and very deliberate. Some of them received those contracts in good faith. Some of them didn't know they were fraudulent. Some of them might want them voided as much as I do. He paused. And some of them will have information about how the contracts were arranged that we don't have yet. Marchetti looked at him for a long moment. You want to contact the contract families? Not all of them. Not yet. He met her eyes. I want to identify them first. You have the ability to access the contract records with your ministry certification, don't you? Once the preliminary notice is filed, which it is, yes, she said slowly. I can pull the sealed contract registrations to confirm the subjects and the authorizing parties. A pause. I haven't done that yet because I was waiting on, I know, Harry said. I'm asking you to do it now. A silence. Marchetti looked at McGonagall, who looked back at her with the expression of a woman who had made a choice the previous Friday night and was continuing to commit to it. I'll pull the registrations today, Marchetti said. Thank you. Harry looked at Vasquez. And thank you. For the procedure. Vasquez inclined her head. Take it easy for the next 24 hours, she said. Your core is recalibrating. Don't attempt complex magic, don't get into any duels, anything else with trolls should probably wait, Ron said from the doorway. And eat well. Your body is adjusting to a significant change. She looked at him with the directness she'd had all along. You'll notice things about your magic that feel new. They're not new. They're just yours. Harry nodded. He thought he understood what she meant. He thought he might not fully understand until later, when he tried something simple, a first-year charm, a Lumos, a Wingardium Leviosa, and felt the difference. He thought that might be a private moment and he was glad it hadn't happened yet, here, in the middle of everything. One more thing, Pomfrey said, from behind her counter. She was looking at Harry with the expression he'd learned to read since Friday night, the one that was professional on the outside and something more personal underneath. I noticed, during the procedure. She paused. Did you notice anything about the final 3 charms in particular? Harry thought about it. 50, 51, 52. The ones that had hit differently. They were older, he said. They were differently constructed, Pomfrey said carefully. Vasquez, would you agree? Vasquez, who had been closing her bag, paused. Yes, she said, equally carefully. The final three were not standard tracking constructs. They were multi-layered. They tracked more than location. Harry looked at her. What else did they track? Emotional state, Vasquez said. Magical output levels. And, she hesitated. Then she said it, because she was that kind of professional. Social interaction metrics. Who you spoke to. Duration of conversations. Frequency. The hospital wing went very quiet. So he knew, Harry said. Not a question. Just the precise articulation of an understanding that was clicking into final position. He knew where I was and how I felt and how much magic I was producing and who I was talking to. If he was monitoring those three constructs, yes, Vasquez said. He was monitoring all 56, Harry said. A man who places 56 tracking charms on a baby monitors all of them. No one said anything. Harry looked at the ceiling for a moment. He thought about every conversation he'd had since September, in the Great Hall, in the common room, in the corridors, in classrooms. He thought about which of those conversations had been overheard by a golden compass on the third shelf from the left in a circular office at the top of a moving staircase. He thought about how much information that gave a person. How much of a picture it painted. How easy it made it to stay ahead of someone you were supposed to be protecting. He thought about Quirrell. About the third-floor corridor. About a troll on Halloween night. He thought about why it might be useful for his guardian to know his emotional state in real time. He was managing me, Harry said. Not just tracking me. Managing. If he knew my emotional state, he could time things. Introduce things at the right moments. He'd know when I was unsettled and when I was content and when I was afraid. He paused. He'd know exactly when I was most likely to do what he wanted. McGonagall, very quietly, said, Harry. I'm not spiraling, Harry said. He turned and looked at her. I'm just finishing the thought because it needs to be finished. A pause. He's been managing me since before I could talk. Everything I know about who I am and where I came from came through him. Every piece of information I have about my parents, about Voldemort, about why I'm here, all of it was given to me by a man who had 56 ways of knowing exactly how I'd receive it. The room was very still. I don't know, Harry said carefully, what parts of what I believe are real and what parts he put there. And I'm not going to be able to know until I find other sources. Sources that didn't go through him. He looked at Marchetti. That's the other thing the Gringotts audit might tell us. What my parents actually, what they intended, for me. Not what he says they intended. Marchetti looked at him steadily. The estate documentation will be part of the vault records, she said. The original will. Yes. Harry picked up his bag again. I'd like to read my parents' actual will. Whatever they actually decided, before anyone decided it for them. He moved toward the door. Ron stepped aside to let him through, and as Harry passed him, Ron said nothing, just fell into step beside him, which was the correct and precise response. Hermione followed on his other side. In the corridor, the afternoon was getting on, 2 o'clock, maybe half past, and the post-lunch flow of students was heading back toward classrooms and common rooms. Harry walked with them, and for the first time in the 11 years and 2 months he had been alive, he felt the simple fact of his own movement through space without the invisible weight of 56 external constructs cataloging every step of it. It was an extraordinary feeling. He didn't say that out loud, because it was the kind of feeling that became less real the moment you tried to put words on it. You're doing that thing, Ron said. What thing? The very quiet but very loud thing, Ron said. Where you're not saying something huge. Harry looked at him sideways. I feel like a different person, he said. Not a bad different. Just, more. He paused. More me. Ron nodded. Absorb that. Good, he said, simply. Vasquez said not to try complex magic for 24 hours, Hermione said, in the tone of someone who was absolutely going to try to enforce this. She said don't attempt complex magic, Harry said. She said nothing about thinking about what it's going to feel like when I can. Hermione made a sound that was caught between exasperation and a laugh. It came out as something in between that was quite characteristic of her. They turned the corner onto the third-floor corridor, heading back toward the common room to pick up books before afternoon classes, and Harry was running through his mental list, the Gringotts audit, the contract registrations from Marchetti, Arthur Weasley's contact at the Oversight Committee, and the one thing he hadn't told anyone yet, not even Hermione. In the second-year reading room adjacent to the library, there was a restricted access cabinet that held, among other things, the Hogwarts historical student records, not academic records, but administrative records, the kind that tracked every student's enrollment, their listed guardians, their custodial arrangements, and their flag status with the ministry. Harry had found the reference to this cabinet on Sunday evening in the back of an administrative charter document that he'd pulled from the law section. The cabinet required a staff passkey. Harry had noticed, on Friday morning, that Professor Flitwick kept his passkey on a ring at the left pocket of his robes. He had also noticed that Flitwick had a habit, between Wednesday morning charms classes and Wednesday lunch, of leaving his robes on the hook inside his classroom while he changed into his slightly less formal midweek set, and that during this 10-minute window the classroom was empty. Harry was not going to steal the key. That was not the plan. The plan was more straightforward and also more interesting. The plan was to talk to Flitwick directly. He'd been turning this over since Sunday, working out the angle, the framing, the right words for the right moment. Flitwick was the ministry liaison for student welfare. Marchetti had filed through the Department of Magical Education. At some point in the next 24 hours, Flitwick was going to receive a notification about the preliminary filing. When he did, he would need to decide what to do with it. Harry wanted to be in that conversation before Dumbledore was. Tomorrow morning. Early. Before breakfast. I need to talk to Flitwick, Harry said. When? Hermione asked. Tomorrow morning. About the ministry liaison role. About everything, Harry said. He's going to find out anyway. I'd rather he find out from me. He paused. The question is whether, when he does, he goes to his ministry obligation or to his Hogwarts obligation. Can't they be the same thing? Ron asked. Maybe, Harry said. I think they might be. But I need to find out which one he leads with. They reached the portrait hole and went in, and the Gryffindor common room was its usual after-lunch self, bright fire, several people playing Exploding Snap in the corner, a few older students looking pained over parchment at the tables near the window. Nobody looked twice at them. Harry sat in his usual chair by the fire and set his bag down and looked at the flames for a moment. The fire looked back. He reached out with his right hand, not a wand, just his hand, and he thought, with no particular effort or direction, just the idle thought of someone checking whether something still worked, and the flames responded. Nothing dramatic. Nothing visible to anyone in the room who wasn't looking closely. Just a slight lean, a very small bend toward the warmth of his attention, like a compass needle finding north. He put his hand down. There was a lot more where that came from. He had 24 hours before he could responsibly use it. He was going to use all 24 of them to make sure that when he did, everything else was already in motion. He pulled out Hermione's case notes and started reading from the beginning. The fire leaned slightly in his direction and stayed there. The afternoon moved along. Classes were the usual classes, history of magic, which Binns taught with the soporific commitment of someone who had been boring people for decades and considered this a professional achievement, and astronomy charts due for review, which Harry finished in 40 minutes and spent the rest of the period reading case law under the desk. Hermione had already finished the astronomy and was on her third rereading of her own notes. Ron had actually paid attention to history of magic on the grounds that it was better than thinking about things, which Harry respected as a coping strategy. Dinner was normal. Afterward, walking back to the common room in the general student flow, Harry felt it for the first time, the difference that Vasquez had predicted and that he'd been too careful to investigate in public. He felt it not as a sensation but as an awareness, a perceptual widening. The castle around him was suddenly present in a way it hadn't been before, not the Stonehan magic of it that all wizarding students talked about in the abstract, but specifically his. The wards running through the walls, the layered enchantments on the staircases, the way the portrait's semi-consciousness registered his passing, he could feel all of it. Not control it. Not interact with it. Just feel it, the way you feel a room's dimensions when you walk into it, a spatial sense of magic that was simply there and had apparently always been there and he had been unable to feel it. He didn't say anything. Just kept walking. Hermione fell into step beside him at the fourth-floor landing and looked at his face. "You can feel the castle," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," he said. "Is it overwhelming?" Harry considered it. "No," he said. "It's like, when you've been in a quiet room for a long time and then you go outside and you can hear everything, but your ears adjust in about 10 seconds. He paused. "I've already adjusted." Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then, in the tone she used when she was genuinely asking rather than testing, "What does it feel like?" "The magic." Harry thought about how to say it. "Like I'm standing in a very large room," he said. "And for the first time, I can see all the walls." Hermione nodded slowly. "Vasquez said it was yours," she said. "That it was always yours." "Yes," Harry said. They went up to the common room. Ron was already there, and Neville Longbottom was at the table near the window, struggling visibly with a transfiguration essay and chewing his quill with the focused misery of someone who wasn't making progress. He looked up when they came in, and looked at Harry with the slightly different expression he'd been wearing since Saturday, something watchful and uncertain, like a person who had overheard a conversation they weren't supposed to but hadn't told anyone they'd heard it. Harry stopped at the table. Sat down across from Neville. Neville blinked. "Hi," he said. "How are you getting on with the transfiguration essay?" Harry said. "Badly," Neville admitted. He looked at his parchment. I know what it should say, I just can't." He stopped. Something in his expression was trying to get out and not quite managing. "The magic doesn't do what I tell it to," he said quietly. "It never really does. Everyone says it gets easier but it's been 2 months and it's not." He stopped himself, like he'd said too much. Harry looked at him for a long moment. He thought about the Rosier case, and about suppressive layering, and about the brass circle with its number 12, and about a question he hadn't asked Pomfrey yet because he hadn't had the right moment. He thought about Neville Longbottom, who was descended from a long line of powerful magical people, whose grandmother was by all accounts a formidable witch, who had arrived at Hogwarts somehow listed as a possible second choice for the same prophecy that had led to Voldemort targeting the Potters, something Harry had read once in a footnote in a history text and hadn't been sure was accurate and was now thinking about differently. "Neville," Harry said carefully. "Have you ever been to St. Mungo's for a diagnostic scan?" Neville frowned. "I was there when my parents were, I've visited. I don't know if I was ever properly scanned." He paused. "Why?" Harry chose his words. "There's a scan Madame Pomfrey does. A deep diagnostic. She did one on me this weekend." He kept his voice even. "It found some things that were affecting my magic. External things. Things someone had put there." He met Neville's eyes. "I just thought, if you've always had trouble with your magic, if it's always felt like it wasn't not quite working," Neville said, very quietly. "Yes," Harry said. "You might want to ask Pomfrey for the scan." Neville looked at his essay. At the half-written sentence. At the quill in his hand. Something moved across his face, something careful and guarded, and underneath that something much more frightened, the look of someone who has suspected something about themselves for a long time and is terrified that being right about it will be worse than not knowing. "Who would have put something on me?" he said. Harry had a very specific thought in that moment that he did not share. He thought, the sane person who benefits from having neither of the prophecy's possible subjects operating at full capacity. "That's what the scan would tell us," Harry said. "It doesn't hurt. Ask Pomfrey." Neville looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, slowly. He picked up his quill and looked at his essay with something in his face that was still frightened but was also, just beginning to be, something else, the look of a person who has spent too long accepting a limitation as permanent and is considering, for the first time, that it might not be. Harry left him to it and moved to his own chair by the fire. At 9 o'clock, when the common room was getting quieter, a small school owl found him with a folded note from Marchetti. He opened it. It said, "Contract registration records accessed. 12 families confirmed. 3 families appear to have paid significant sums under the description of guardianship arrangement fees. 9 families received contracts under the description of political alliance instruments. 1 contract is significantly different from the others in a way that I will explain in person. Please arrange to meet tomorrow before Flitwick." Harry read it twice. Folded it. Looked at the fire. 1 contract different from the others. He let that sit in his mind for a while, turning it over, trying to find the shape of it. 12 families. 3 had paid. 9 were political. 1 was different. Different how? Different enough that Marchetti, who was measured and precise in everything, felt it warranted an in-person explanation rather than a written note. He looked at the fire for a long time. It leaned toward him, steady and warm, with the patient attentiveness of something that had been waiting to know him properly for a very long time. Outside the high windows of Gryffindor Tower, November was getting properly into itself, cold and dark and deeply serious, the kind of night that felt like a held breath. Somewhere across the castle, a golden compass on a particular shelf rotated in its small circle. But the information it had been built to track, the emotional state and magical output of one Harry James Potter, had fundamentally changed. And the man watching it was going to notice. Harry went to bed. He slept cleanly, deeply, with the quality of sleep that comes after the completion of something necessary. Tomorrow, Flitwick. Tomorrow, Marchetti. Tomorrow, the one contract that was different. Chapter 4, The Contracts. Marchetti was already in the 4th-floor office when Harry arrived at 7:15, which told him something about how she'd slept. She had 3 folders on the table in front of her, arranged with the precision of someone who had organized their thoughts into physical objects, and she was drinking coffee from a flask that she'd clearly brought herself rather than sourcing from the castle, which told him something else. "Sit down," she said, without preamble. Harry sat. He'd come alone, deliberately. This felt like a conversation that needed to be had cleanly first, before it got filtered through anyone else's reaction to it. He could bring Hermione and Ron up to speed afterward. Marchetti opened the first folder. 12 families, she said. "I'll give you the names." She read them. Harry listened to all 12 without interrupting, keeping his face neutral, filing each name in the same way he'd been filing things since Saturday night, not by emotional response but by category. Former Death Eaters or adjacent, 4 names. Political allies of Dumbledore's from various factions of the Wizengamot, 5 names. Neutral families with social standing that would make an alliance useful, 2 names. And the 12th. Marchetti said the 12th name, and Harry was quiet for a moment. "Say that again," he said. She said it again. "Longbottom." Harry looked at the table for a moment. He thought about Neville at the common room table last night, with his struggling essay and his magic that had never quite worked, and the frightened look on his face when Harry had asked about the scan. "Augusta Longbottom," Marchetti said, reading from the folder. "The contract was placed in November 1981, 3 weeks after your parents' deaths. The subject named in the contract is Neville Longbottom." She paused. He was 14 months old at the time. You were 15 months. And this is the different one, Harry said. Yes. Marchetti set the folder down. The other 11 contracts were placed over a period of 3 months, between November 1981 and January 1982. The fees were paid in January 1982, for the 3 families that paid. The Longbottom contract is different in 2 specific ways. She opened the folder fully and turned it so Harry could see the document photograph she'd pulled from the registry. First, it was placed with Augusta Longbottom's knowledge and apparent consent. She signed it. Second, there was no payment in either direction. Harry looked at the document. Augusta Longbottom's signature was at the bottom, old-fashioned and deliberate. Dumbledore's signature was above it, in the looping confident hand Harry had seen on official school correspondence. She agreed to it, he said. She agreed to something, Marchetti said carefully. The question is whether she understood what she was agreeing to and under what circumstances she agreed. She closed the folder and picked up her coffee. I spoke with her this morning, by flu, before I came here. Harry looked up. You contacted her already? I didn't sleep, Marchetti said, without particular drama. I found the Longbottom contract at 2 in the morning and I couldn't leave it. She drank her coffee. Augusta Longbottom is not a pleasant woman. She is also not stupid and she is not complicit in anything she understood to be wrong. She agreed to the contract in November 1981 under the following circumstances. Her son and daughter-in-law had just been tortured into insanity by Bellatrix Lestrange. She was the sole guardian of a 14-month-old boy who was on a list of potential targets. She was terrified. And Dumbledore came to her and told her that a betrothal contract between Neville and Harry would create a protective magical bond between the 2 children that would extend his protection to Neville. Harry stared at her. He told her, Harry said slowly, that a marriage contract between 2 14-month-old boys would protect Neville. Yes. That's not how betrothal magic works. No, Marchetti said. It is not. There's no such protection mechanism in betrothal contracts. Hermione would have found it in the research if it existed. She went through the entire statute. It doesn't exist, Marchetti confirmed. He invented it. She was a grieving woman in a crisis and he told her what she needed to hear and she signed. A pause. She was furious this morning. Not at you. At him. Another pause. She also said, and I want to quote this precisely because I think it matters, I knew something was wrong with Neville's magic and I couldn't find the source. I assumed it was trauma. I assumed wrong. The quiet in the room had a particular quality. He put suppressive charms on Neville too, Harry said. She has agreed to bring Neville to the hospital wing this morning for Pomfrey's diagnostic scan, Marchetti said. She flooded McGonagall directly after speaking to me. I believe they are there now. Harry stood up. Sat back down. Made himself stay still because standing up wasn't going to move things faster. Right, he said. All right. He looked at the folders. The 3 families who paid. How much? Marchetti opened the second folder. The 3 families paid varying amounts. The smallest was 2,000 galleons. The largest was 35,000. Harry looked at the number. 35,000 galleons. He didn't yet have a full sense of wizarding currency values, but he had a working sense, and 35,000 was very large. Who paid the most? Marchetti said the name. Harry recognized it. First year, Slytherin, blonde hair and a voice like a boy who had never once been told no. They had met on a robe fitting in Diagon Alley and it had not gone well. Malfoy, Harry said. Lucius Malfoy paid 35,000 galleons in January 1982 for a betrothal contract between Harry James Potter and Draco Lucius Malfoy, Marchetti said. Draco Malfoy was born June 5, 1980. He was 18 months old at the time of the contract. Harry was quiet for a long moment. He thought about Draco Malfoy on the train in September, extending his hand and being refused. He thought about every snide comment in the corridor since then, every attempted provocation, every performance of contempt. He thought about whether Draco knew. Whether Lucius Malfoy had told his son or whether Draco had been walking around since September with a contract over his head the same as Harry had, except that Draco's family had paid for it. Does Draco know? Harry asked. Unknown. Marchetti closed the second folder. Lucius Malfoy will need to be informed that the contract is being voided as part of the formal proceedings. Whether he tells his son before or after that notification is his decision. Harry thought about Draco Malfoy knowing. About the specific social catastrophe of Draco Malfoy learning that his father had paid 35,000 galleons for a contract that was about to be declared fraudulent and void. He had a vivid imagination for other people's worst moments, and he found, when he applied it here, that he didn't feel any satisfaction about it. Just a kind of flat recognition that this was going to be very bad for Draco in ways that had nothing to do with Harry's choices. The other two families that paid, Harry said. Greengrass, Marchetti said. 15,000 galleons. Contract for their eldest daughter, Daphne. She looked at her notes. And Zabini. 8,000. Contract for Blaise. Slytherin, Slytherin, Slytherin. Harry filed that away. The 9 political alliance contracts, Harry said. Those are more varied. 3 Hufflepuff families of old lineage, 2 Ravenclaw-lined families, and 4 that don't map cleanly to house affiliation, older families with Wizengamot seats. She listed them. None of those families paid, and based on my preliminary assessment, several of them may genuinely not have understood that the custodial arrangement was being used to place these contracts without your knowledge or consent. The paperwork was presented as standard alliance documentation. Standard, Harry said. In older wizarding tradition, betrothal contracts between prominent families were reasonably common practice. Less so now, but not unheard of. A family receiving a contract from Albus Dumbledore in late 1981, in the immediate aftermath of Voldemort's fall, when he was at the absolute peak of his public authority, might have accepted it without asking difficult questions. She paused. Some of them definitely should have asked difficult questions. But the fraudulent element is primarily in the use of custodial authority and in the financial exchange. The receiving families are witnesses and subjects of the fraud, not its perpetrators. Unless they knew it was fraudulent and accepted it anyway, Harry said. Possibly, in some cases. That's for the Wizengamot to assess. She closed the third folder. Harry. I want to be direct with you about something. Go ahead. The Malfoy contract is going to be the most publicly volatile element of this entire case. She looked at him steadily. Lucius Malfoy is not someone who takes humiliation quietly. The revelation that he paid 35,000 galleons for a contract that was fraudulently sold by his own political ally, because he and Dumbledore have been political allies on several Wizengamot matters over the years, which will also come out, that revelation will make him dangerous. A pause. Not to the legal proceedings. The proceedings are sound. But personally. Reputationally. He will look for somewhere to direct that. At me, Harry said. Possibly. Or at his son. She met his eyes. I'm telling you so that you're prepared. Harry looked at the folders on the table. 12 families. 3 payments. 1 contract built on a lie told to a grieving grandmother. A golden compass on a shelf that had been monitoring an 11-year-old's social interactions. I want to go see Neville, he said. He found Neville in the hospital wing, sitting on an examination bed with Augusta Longbottom standing beside him like a particularly well-armed coat of arms. Augusta Longbottom was exactly as Harry had imagined her from Ron's descriptions, a severe woman in her 60s with a hat that communicated battle readiness and eyes that were currently in the process of processing a significant amount of rage through a fine mesh filter of aristocratic composure. She looked at Harry when he came through the door and said, without greeting, "You triggered the scan." "Yes," Harry said. "Good," she said. One word, absolute, and in it Harry heard the same quality he'd heard in McGonagall's very badly, in hindsight, years of something that hadn't been said being said all at once. Neville was pale. He was sitting with his hands on his knees and his shoulders very slightly hunched, the posture of someone who has just received information and hasn't yet worked out what to do with his body in response to it. He looked at Harry with an expression that was layered. There was the shock, and underneath it there was the particular look of someone whose suspicion about themselves has just been confirmed, and underneath that something raw and frightened and very young. "How many?" Harry asked Pomfrey, who was organizing the diagnostic instruments with the focused efficiency of someone performing a second scan of the morning. 31, Pomfrey said. She didn't look up. All tracking constructs. And 17 suppressive overlays, different from tracking charms, specifically designed to impede the natural outward expression of magical ability. Harry looked at Neville. Neville looked at Harry. 17 suppressive overlays, Neville said. He sounded like he was testing the words, seeing if they broke anything. That's why I can never, he stopped. Yes, Harry said. That's why. Augusta Longbottom made a sound. It was small and it was immediately controlled, but Harry heard what was in it, the specific sound of a grandmother understanding exactly how much she hadn't been able to give her grandson because something she'd unknowingly agreed to had been taking it from him. The removal procedure, Augusta said to Pomfrey. Can it be done today? I'll contact Healer Vasquez immediately, Pomfrey said. Good. Augusta looked at Neville. She put her hand briefly on his shoulder, a quick, direct gesture that was clearly not her natural mode of physical expression and therefore meant considerably more than a natural gesture would have. We'll fix it, she said. Gran, Neville said. We'll fix it, she said again, and that was apparently all that was going to be said on the subject, but Neville seemed to understand everything that was in it, and his shoulders came up slightly. Harry sat down in the chair next to Neville's bed. Are you all right? He asked. I don't know yet, Neville said honestly. Then, you figured it out last night, didn't you? In the common room. You already knew before you asked me about the scan. I suspected, Harry said. Because of the prophecy, Neville said quietly. Harry looked at him. You know about the prophecy? Gran told me. When I was 9. She said there'd been a prophecy that could have applied to either of us and Voldemort chose you, and I should know because it might matter someday. Neville looked at his hands. She said she was glad he chose you. She said it in the way that meant she wasn't entirely sure she should be glad. He paused. I always felt guilty about that. Feeling relieved that it was you instead. Don't, Harry said. Easy to say. I'm not saying it to make you feel better. I'm saying it because it doesn't help anything. Harry looked at him steadily. You didn't choose it. I didn't choose it. Neither of us has anything to feel guilty about. A pause. What we can choose is what we do now. Neville thought about that. What are we doing now? Building a case, Harry said. The removal today, and then you're part of it, if you want to be. 2 subjects with documented suppressive overlays is stronger than 1. If you're willing to have your scan results added to the formal record, yes, Neville said, without hesitating. Augusta looked at Harry with a reassessment that moved across her face quick and sharp. You've already been to the ministry, she said. This is already formally filed. Yes, Harry said. Without Dumbledore knowing. He knows something is different. He doesn't know what yet. Augusta was quiet for a moment, in the calculating way of someone updating their model of a situation. You'll need family representatives, she said. When it goes to the Wisengamot. A minor cannot bring a formal proceeding without adult representation, even with a legal examiner. I'm working on that, Harry said. You'll want me, Augusta said. It was not an offer. It was a declaration of intent in the form of a statement. Harry looked at her. He thought about what it meant to have Augusta Longbottom, who had signed a contract she'd been lied into, deciding that her response to that betrayal was to become the most formidable thing in the courtroom. He thought about what that kind of contained, directed fury could do in a formal proceeding. "Yes," he said. "I'll want you." Augusta nodded once, in the manner of someone ratifying an agreement. "Good." She looked at Pomfrey. "When will the healer arrive?" "Within the hour," Pomfrey said. "Then I'll be back within the hour." Augusta picked up her bag with the decisive movement of someone who had places to be and things to make happen. "Neville. Eat something." She left. Neville watched her go. "She's angry," he said. "Very," Harry agreed. "She doesn't get angry at Dumbledore. She thinks she used to think he was," he stopped. "She trusted him." "A lot of people did," Harry said. "That's part of what makes this complicated." "Is it complicated?" Neville asked. "Because from where I'm sitting, it feels like the opposite of complicated. It feels like someone did something very clear and very wrong." Harry looked at him. He thought about that for a moment, the way complexity could sometimes be a frame that powerful people placed around simple wrongdoing to make it harder to respond to. "It's complicated. There are reasons. You have to understand the larger picture." All of which was sometimes true and sometimes was just the architecture of excuse-making dressed up as nuance. "You're right," Harry said. "It's clear and it's wrong. The complexity is in what comes after, not in what was done." Neville nodded slowly. He seemed to find that useful in some way that he didn't articulate. "Harry," he said. "Your removal, yesterday. Do you feel different?" Harry thought about the fire in the common room leaning toward him. The castle's ward sitting in his awareness like a new sense. The quality of clean that Vasquez had mentioned, that he described as a room you could finally see the walls of. "Yes," he said simply. "Is it worth it? The procedure, I mean." "It's not," Pomfrey said. "It wasn't painful, but it sounded like it was." "It's worth it," Harry said. "Completely." Neville looked at his hands again. "Okay," he said. Harry left him there and went to find Hermione and Ron. He found them in the great hall at breakfast, and he sat down and told them everything, the 12 names, the amounts, the Longbottom contract, Neville. He watched their faces as he talked. Ron's moved from blank to furious to something that had settled into a kind of grim determination. Hermione's moved differently, through shock and calculation and landing somewhere that was making rapid connections between what she was hearing and what she already knew. Neville was the other prophecy child, she said. Yes. And he had suppressive overlays specifically targeting magical expression. Meaning he was not just tracked but actively, reduced. She put her fork down. Harry, if the prophecy could have applied to either of you, then having you operating below your magical capacity and Neville operating below his magical capacity, made sure neither of us was a real threat, Harry said. Yes. Even after Voldemort was gone. Even after. Harry looked at his porridge. Because he's not gone, is he? Not really. Everyone knows he might come back. He paused. And someone wanted to make sure that if he did, the two people who might be positioned to stop him were already compromised. The great hall noise moved around them, cheerful and oblivious, hundreds of students eating breakfast with the magnificent unconcern of people not currently building a legal case against their headmaster. Does that mean, Ron said carefully, that Dumbledore was planning for Voldemort to come back? I don't know, Harry said. It might mean he was planning to manage any response to Voldemort coming back. Which is different. He paused. Or it might mean he had a use for us that required us to be strong enough to be useful but not so strong that we were unmanageable. A beat. I don't know. That's speculative. I don't need speculation right now, I need evidence. The Gringotts audit, Hermione said. The Gringotts audit, Harry confirmed. 3 to 5 more days. What do we do until then? Ron asked. The contract families, Harry said. Marchetti says the 9 political alliance families will need to be formally notified when the proceedings begin. But before that, before the Wiesengemot hearing, I want to approach one of them independently. Which one? Hermione asked. Harry had been thinking about this since reading Marchetti's note. He'd been turning over the 9 families, running what he knew about each of them, looking for the variable that made one more useful than the others as a potential ally before the formal proceedings began rather than during them. Greengrass, he said. 15,000 galleons. They paid for their daughter Daphne's contract. But, he looked at Hermione. In the research you did on the betrothal statute, the receiving party in a fraudulent contract has some protection, don't they? If they paid in good faith and the contract was fraudulently sold, they're entitled to full restitution plus damages, Hermione said, who had this on her 3rd page of notes. The fraudulent party bears all costs. So the Greengrass family paid 15,000 galleons and they're entitled to get it back plus damages, Harry said. If they know that, if they're told that clearly and in a context where they understand what the fraud was, then voiding the contract isn't a loss for them. It's a gain. You think they'll cooperate, Ron said. I think a family that paid 15,000 galleons and was defrauded is going to be considerably less interested in protecting Dumbledore's reputation than a family that received a contract for free as a political favor. Harry drank his pumpkin juice. Money makes things clearer. You can't approach them directly, Hermione said. You're a student. Sending an 11-year-old to negotiate with an established wizarding family, I know, Harry said. Marchetti will make contact formally. But I want to brief her on the approach before she does. He looked across the hall. At the Slytherin table. At Daphne Greengrass, who was eating breakfast with the composed self-possession of a girl who had been raised to maintain a correct bearing in all circumstances, her dark hair neat, her robes immaculate. She was sitting 3 seats from Draco Malfoy, who was currently holding court in his usual way, talking with his hands, his 2 attendants laughing on cue. Harry looked at Draco for a moment. He was going to have to think about Draco. Not today. Today was too full. But soon. The morning's lessons came and went. In Charms, first period, Flitwick bouncing at the front of the room with his usual energy, making the summoning charm demonstration look effortless, Harry sat through the lesson with his full attention while part of his mind worked on the Flitwick problem. He needed to speak to Flitwick before Dumbledore spoke to Flitwick, and the morning was getting on, and the window he'd identified, Wednesday morning, empty classroom, was 2 days away, which was too long. He made a decision at the end of the lesson. Professor Flitwick, he said, while the other students gathered their things and filed out. Flitwick, who was tidying his demonstration table, looked up. Mr. Potter. Good lesson today, your summoning charm is coming along nicely. Thank you, Harry said. He waited until the last student had cleared the doorway. I need to speak with you. About your ministry liaison role. Flitwick set down the wand he'd been holding and looked at Harry with an attention that was quite different from his usual cheerful teaching energy, older, more careful. I see, he said. I know Marchetti filed a preliminary notice yesterday, Harry said. Through the Department of Magical Education. You would have received a copy. A pause. I received a copy, Flitwick said carefully. Then you know the outline. Harry looked at him steadily. I wanted you to hear the rest of it from me before anyone else told you what to think about it. He paused. You're the school's independent ministry contact for student welfare. That means your authority comes from outside the Hogwarts hierarchy. I need to know if that independence is real or if it's nominal. Flitwick regarded him for a moment. He was a small man, smaller than Harry, which wasn't common, with the ancient quality of someone who had been teaching for a very long time and had seen a great many things and had particular feelings about what happened to students in his care. Sit down, Mr. Potter, he said. Harry sat. My independence, Flitwick said, sitting opposite him, is real. I hold my ministry certification independently of my Hogwarts appointment. My reporting obligation goes to the Department of Magical Education, not to the Board of Governors, not to any individual in this school. He paused. When I received the preliminary notice yesterday morning, I read it 3 times. Then I sent a response to the department confirming receipt and requesting a case briefing. A smaller pause. Then I sat in my office for approximately an hour thinking about a great many things. What things? Harry said. Things I had noticed, Flitwick said quietly, over the course of 11 years, that I had explained to myself in ways that were less alarming than they should have been. He looked at Harry with the direct gaze of a small man who had survived a great many things by being more formidable than he appeared. I was a dueling champion, Mr. Potter. Before I was a teacher. I know what suppressed magical development looks like. I noticed it in your first lesson. He paused. I told myself it was the late start. Children who grow up in Muggle households without access to magic often show some initial suppression. I told myself that. But 56 tracking constructs is not a late start, Flitwick said flatly. And I should have looked more carefully. He straightened. I am looking more carefully now. What do you need? Harry told him. He laid it out in the same clear order he'd given Marchetti: the scan, the instruments, the signature, the preliminary notice, the Gringotts letter, the contract registrations, Neville. Flitwick listened without interrupting, his expression moving from careful to grim to something that was simply, quietly furious in the way of someone who had spent their life caring about the correct treatment of students and was confronting evidence of its opposite. When Harry finished, Flitwick was quiet for a moment. Longbottom, he said. 31 charms and 17 suppressive overlays. Vasquez is doing his removal this morning, Harry said. I knew his parents, Flitwick said. Before. They were fine people. A pause, the brief pause of someone closing a door on something. What do you need from me specifically? 2 things, Harry said. First, formal co-signatory on the student welfare complaint, which gives it a second independent ministry-certified signature alongside Marchetti's. That makes it significantly harder to challenge on procedural grounds. Done, Flitwick said, without hesitation. Second, the historical student administrative records. The cabinet on the 4th floor. Flitwick looked at him. What are you looking for in those records? My guardianship file. The original documentation of Dumbledore's custodial appointment. When it was filed, under what authority, whether my parents' actual will is on record there or only a summary. Harry met his eyes. I've requested the Gringotts vault records, which will have estate documentation, but the school administrative file might show discrepancies, things that were altered or omitted. Flitwick was quiet for a moment. You think the administrative record was interfered with? I think a man who placed 56 tracking charms on a child was very careful about the paper trail, Harry said. Which means either the administrative record is perfectly clean, which is useful evidence in itself, or it isn't. Flitwick nodded slowly. He opened his desk drawer and produced a small brass key on a plain ring. He held it out to Harry. Harry looked at it. You trust me with that? I trust you to use it for what you said you need it for, Flitwick said. Which is the appropriate basis for trust. He paused. I'd also like to accompany you to the records cabinet. As the authorized staff holder of the key, my presence makes the review formally witnessed. When? Harry said. This afternoon, Flitwick said. After classes. 4 o'clock. Harry took the key. He stood up to leave, and then he stopped. He turned back. Professor Flitwick, he said. Why didn't Dumbledore charm you? Flitwick blinked. Then something moved across his face, recognition, and something that might have been a dark kind of amusement. Because I hold an independent ministry appointment, he said. Interfering with a ministry liaison officer's perceptions or movements is a separate class of violation. It carries severe penalties. A small pause. Some cages are made of bars. Some are made of consequences. The result is the same. Harry looked at him. Are you saying he left you alone because it was too risky to do otherwise? Not because he trusted you. I am saying, Flitwick said carefully, that in 30 years of working in this school, Albus Dumbledore has never once asked my opinion on a matter affecting student welfare. He straightened his collar. I always found that slightly odd. Now I don't find it odd at all. Harry went back to the corridor. The day unfolded in the way of days that are too full: Transfiguration, lunch, history of magic, and in the spaces between them the constant low-level management of a situation that was moving on multiple fronts simultaneously. Hermione tracked the case law, adding to her notes with the focused energy of someone who had found the perfect application for a skill she'd been building since she could read. Ron was increasingly useful in a different way. His natural read of people and his knowledge of wizarding social structures meant he caught things that Harry and Hermione, approaching it from a legal and tactical angle, sometimes missed. The Greengrass family, Ron said at lunch, keeping his voice low. I know something about them that might matter. My dad mentioned them once when he was talking about families that were borderline during the war, not Death Eaters, but not Resistance either. Pure blood, old money, politically quiet. He paused. He said they were the kind of family that made deals with whoever was winning. Which means they're also the kind of family that's very alert to which way the wind is blowing. And the wind is blowing away from Dumbledore, Harry said. If they get a formal notification that a case is proceeding and that they're entitled to restitution, Ron said, they'll smell which direction the outcome is going and they'll position accordingly. Marchetti should emphasize the restitution provision in her contact letter, Hermione said. First paragraph. Lead with what they stand to gain. I'll tell her, Harry said. At 4 o'clock he met Flitwick in the second-year reading room adjacent to the library. The records cabinet was in the back corner, plain wood, unremarkable, the kind of thing you'd walk past 100 times without registering. Flitwick unlocked it with the brass key and stood to one side. Harry went through the files with methodical efficiency, pulling the Hogwarts administrative folders alphabetically, finding the P section, and extracting the file for Potter, Harry James. Born July 31, 1980. Enrolled October 31, 1991. Listed guardian for Hogwarts correspondence, Petunia Dursley. Listed magical custodian, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. He read the custodial appointment documentation. It was a standard form, the kind used when a magical custodian was appointed under emergency provisions. He read it once, then again, then he found the line he was looking for. Appointed under provisions of the Revised Guardianship Act 1967, Section 12, B. Emergency Custodial Transfer. Original testamentary document, see attached. He looked for the attached document. There was no attached document. There was a note, handwritten in the small crisp administrative script of whichever Hogwarts registrar had filed this in 1981, testamentary attachment received in summary form only, original document held by custodian. Harry looked at that line for a long time. The original will, he said, is supposedly held by Dumbledore. Flitwick, reading over his shoulder, was quiet. It's not filed with the school. It's not at Gringotts, or rather, there may be an estate copy at Gringotts, which is what the audit might find, but the administrative record here references an original document that is held by the appointed custodian. Harry looked at Flitwick. That's irregular, isn't it? Wills are normally filed with Gringotts and with the Ministry Records Department, Flitwick said. The testamentary document supporting a custodial appointment should be on file with the school as backup documentation. He looked at the note. This summary provision was unusual even when it was filed. The registrar at the time was. He paused. Gertrude Farquhar. She retired in 1983. She was, by all accounts, a careful woman. Another pause. A careful woman who accepted a summary when she should have required the original. Because she was told to, Harry said. That would be my assessment, Flitwick said. Harry photographed the file page with a documentation charm Hermione had shown him that morning, one of the legitimate copying charms from the administrative section of the school charter that students were technically allowed to use for their own records. He filed everything back exactly as he'd found it. "The original will," he said, as they locked the cabinet. "If it's held by Dumbledore and he's the subject of the investigation, can it be compelled?" "Once a formal Wisengamot proceeding is opened," Flitwick said, "any documentation held by the subject that is relevant to the proceeding can be compelled by subpoena." He paused. "If it still exists. Do you think he might have destroyed it?" Harry asked. "I think," Flitwick said carefully, "that a man who placed 17 suppressive overlays on Neville Longbottom was very invested in certain futures playing out in certain ways. And I think the contents of your parents' original will might not have been fully consistent with those futures." He paused. "Sirius Black, for instance." Harry went still. "Your godfather," Flitwick said quietly. "Named in the will, almost certainly, as your intended guardian in the event of both your parents' deaths. He was in Azkaban within 2 days of your parents' deaths. Without trial." He met Harry's eyes. "If Dumbledore held the will, he held the knowledge that Black was your intended guardian. He chose not to act on it." The reading room was very quiet. "That's not in the legal case," Harry said. "Not yet." "No," Flitwick said. "But it might be." Harry walked back to the common room through the late afternoon castle with that thought sitting in the center of everything else, very heavy and very clear. Sirius Black. A man in Azkaban without trial, who was supposed to be his guardian, who had never been given the chance to do the one job he'd apparently been assigned. He thought about two-way mirrors. About smuggled communication. About the 12 years his godfather had been in prison. That was a very long thread. He wasn't going to pull it tonight. Tonight there was Neville. Harry found him in the common room, sitting in a chair by the window with a blanket over his shoulders because Vasquez had given him the same 24 hours recovery instruction she'd given Harry. He looked different. Not dramatically, he was still Neville, still round-faced, still wearing the slightly anxious default expression. But there was something in his posture that had changed, some small increment of space he was occupying differently. Harry sat beside him and said nothing for a moment. "It worked," Neville said. "Yeah. Pomfrey did a small test after. Nothing major. Just a simple Lumos." He looked at his hands. "It worked first time." He was quiet. "It's always worked first time before. Just not for me. Not since," he stopped. "I thought I was just bad at it." "You were never bad at it," Harry said. "I know that now." A pause. "That's almost the worst part. Knowing it wasn't me." He looked out the window at the darkening grounds. 17 overlays. Since I was a baby. He turned and looked at Harry with an expression that was no longer the frightened look from the morning. It had moved through several stages since then and landed somewhere else, something quieter, more settled, and underneath that, cold, dark and patient, something that was waiting. "What happens now?" "Now the case builds," Harry said. "Your scan results go into the formal record. Your grandmother is going to be at the hearing. The Gringotts audit arrives in a few days, and when it does, we have everything we need to open formal Wisengamot proceedings. And Dumbledore? He'll know something is wrong before the hearing. He already knows something is different. But knowing something is coming isn't the same as being able to stop it." Harry paused. "He has influence. He has allies. He has 30 years of public trust that people will use to explain away what he did." A pause. "None of that makes him right." Neville looked out the window for a moment. "He's going to say he did it for good reasons," he said. "He's going to have an explanation." "Yes," Harry said. "He will. He'll have a very good one. He's very smart." But, Harry said, "having a good explanation for doing something wrong doesn't make it not wrong." He looked at Neville steadily. You spent 10 years unable to use your own magic properly. That happened. Whatever reasons he had, that happened. Neville absorbed that. Nodded slowly. I want to be at the hearing, he said. Not just as a subject in the record. I want to be there. You should be, Harry said. It's yours as much as mine. They sat together for a while in the warm common room, the fire doing its usual work, the ordinary noise of Gryffindor House moving around them, someone winning a game of exploding snap, someone arguing about a Quidditch statistic, someone reading out loud from a Transfiguration text in the despairing tone of a person who has read the same paragraph 4 times. The normal, unglamorous texture of life. Hermione appeared and sat on the arm of Harry's chair with her notes because there wasn't a free seat near the fire, and Ron came in from the dormitory and draped himself over the chair nearest the hearth, and the 4 of them sat in a loose comfortable silence that was the particular silence of people who are in the middle of something important together and don't need to be talking about it every second to know it's real. The contract families, Hermione said eventually, because she couldn't leave it completely alone. The 9 political alliance ones. When the Wisengamot proceedings open, they'll be called as witnesses. Yes, Harry said. Some of them will be hostile, she said. They'll try to characterize the contracts as legitimate. They'll say it was accepted practice, that they received them in good faith, that, Marchetti knows how to handle hostile witnesses, Harry said. That's what she's for. Hermione looked slightly mollified. I know. I just want to make sure we've thought through all of it. We've thought through all of it, Ron said. Can we think through it at a slightly lower intensity for the next 20 minutes while I sit by this fire? Hermione made a face at him, but she closed her notes. Harry looked at the fire. It leaned toward him, and the feeling of it, the full uncompressed feeling of his own magic, properly his, properly present, was still there, solid and warm and exactly as large as it had always been supposed to be. Tomorrow, Marchetti would contact the Greengrass family. In 3 to 5 days, the Gringotts audit would arrive. And somewhere in the castle, a man with half-moon spectacles was looking at a golden compass that was telling him less and less about the boy it had been tracking for 11 years, and was very gradually arriving at the understanding that the architecture of control he had spent a decade building had developed a crack that he could not simply paper over with warmth and good intentions. Harry put his feet up toward the fire. He had 12 contracts to void, an audit to receive, a godfather in prison, a headmaster who didn't know yet what was coming, and 17 years' worth of his parents' actual wishes sitting in a document that was being withheld by the man who should have executed it. He had, he thought, a reasonably full week ahead of him. The fire leaned. He let it.